So we got some crazy news this morning. Apparently, Ukraine sent a drone to kill Vladimir Putin. Fortunately, he was not there. He did not die, except that's the narrative coming out of the Kremlin. We don't actually know what really happened. There's the fog of war. And many people are saying either this was a false flag attack on the Kremlin so that there would be some kind of justification for escalation or an attempt to rally public support in Russia for the war in Ukraine, or Ukraine actually did make a crude attempt at taking out Vladimir Putin. Either way, you can expect some kind of escalation. And there are many people who are saying, oh, no, this is it. This is World War III. And I'm kind of like, I don't know if this is it. But an attack on the Kremlin is fairly serious. And if it wasn't really an attack on the Kremlin, they're going to act like it was. So still fairly serious. But we'll talk about that. We got some news as it pertains to Anheuser-Busch. Apparently, they've begun giving out free Bud Light to distributors in desperation. Wow. I did not think the boycott would be so effective. They'd start giving the beer away desperately because nobody's buying it. But this is where we are right now. And then I guess because, I'm trying to give you a black pill sandwich. It's like we got really bad news on war and then some good news. Boycotts working. Here's the bad news again. More banks are collapsing. So, how you doing? I hope you guys have taken precautions and consulted with a fine financial advisor as First Republic Bank was seized by the U.S. government, sold up to JP Morgan, and now more banks are starting to fall. We'll see how this one plays out. Before we get started, my friends, today's episode is brought to you by Public Square. We are huge fans of Public Square. Go to publicsq.com, download the app. This is an app that shows you businesses who actually share American values. Stop giving money to companies that hate you. Give your money to companies that believe in what you believe in. And if you're trying to find these businesses, it's simple. Go to publicsq.com, sign up, download the app, look at the map, and you can see all of the businesses in your area and even around the country and digital businesses with online shipping and shopping that agree with your values. It's really incredible. We've had them on this show before, and the founders were really big fans of what Public Square is doing, especially when we're talking about these boycotts with Anheuser-Busch and things like that. The easiest way for you to win is to vote with your dollars. Again, shout out to our good friends over at Public Square. We are really big fans. publicsq.com. Thanks for sponsoring the show, guys. And head over to timcast.com. Click that Join Us button to become a member. Join the Discord server to talk with like-minded individuals 24/7. Share your thoughts and ideas, and even submit questions to call into our members-only uncensored show Monday through Thursday at about 10 p.m. Eastern. We put the show up on the front page of the website live and, of course, archived. And we're going to have one of these shows tonight. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. So support our work directly by becoming a member, and you can check out that uncensored show. Smash the like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Joining us tonight to talk about all of this and more is James Rosen.
Thank you.
Who are you, sir?
Oh, identify yourself. Yes.
Yes.
Well, I have my ID somewhere here. James Rosen, Chief White House Correspondent for Newsmax and author most recently of Scalia, Rise to Greatness, 1936 to 1986, Volume 1 of a 2-volume biography of Antonin Scalia.
Is there a website URL or something for people to find the book?
You can just go to my Twitter feed at James Rosen TV. You'll find everything you need there.
And I think, I don't know, what I most have known you for is because 10 years ago, you were illegally, and I'm assuming literally and codified as illegal or adjudicated as illegal, but in our view and all the activists, spied on and targeted by the Obama administration for literally doing journalism. And it was shockingly corrupt. So this story was huge in the activist circles and the freedom of information circles. Strangely, now many of these left-leaning individuals have abandoned those principles, but that was you, targeted by Obama.
So yeah, we're actually coming up on the 10th anniversary of when this all first came to light. It was May 20, 2013. But the actual surveillance that you're talking about had happened earlier. How to make this brief. I was a reporter for Fox News at the time. I was covering the State Department. And I did a series of reports relating to different facets of North Korea, their nuclear program, how they intended to respond to various actions by the United States vis-a-vis their nuclear program, and also information relating to the succession plan that resulted in Kim Jong-un taking power in North Korea. And that reporting at the time for Fox News even was able to expose the fact that the mission of North Korea at the United Nations in New York was sending out points, sort of talking points about the son, Kim Jong-un, who was only dimly known at that time, that were to be absorbed and internalized by all North Korean personnel, diplomatic personnel around the world. Eventually, the Obama administration, concerned about my reporting, launched a national security leak investigation. And they zeroed in on someone whom they identified as a source for me. And ultimately, to avoid the lengthy and debilitating costs of a trial, that person stood up in open court and pleaded guilty to providing national defense information to James Rosen of Fox News. I have never identified whether this person was a source of mine or not, because I don't think that's an appropriate business for reporters.
But they called you a co-conspirator, didn't
Yes,
they?
and so as
Crazy.
it was later disclosed that in order to have access to all of my Gmails, with which I use to communicate with sources, and to the phone records pertaining to 20 different phone lines associated with me, including even the phone records of my parents on Staten Island at the time.
Wow.
An FBI agent swore out a sworn statement, an affidavit, for a search warrant application for a federal judge to approve. And in that document, this FBI agent attested that given his experience, James Rosen is running his sources like an intelligence officer, which was almost like a professional compliment of sorts. But they designated me in that document as a criminal co-conspirator in a violation of the Espionage Act. And it was the first time that's ever been applied to any reporter. Let's just by way of context, Neil Sheehan, now deceased, who was the New York Times reporter who in 1971 broke the Pentagon Papers, which was 7,000 pages of classified documents, an internal Defense Department study tracing the arc of American involvement in Vietnam. Not even the Nixon administration designated Neil Sheehan as a criminal co-conspirator in a violation of the Espionage Act. How did this resolve itself? President Obama himself, at a speech at National Defense University on counterterrorism at the time, proclaimed himself troubled by the notion of working reporters being criminalized for doing their jobs. And to get to the bottom of how this possibly could have happened, this novel legal designation that was applied in a secret search warrant application filed by an FBI officer and approved by a federal judge so they could gain access to all of those records. To get to the bottom of how that happened, President Obama, in what passed for accountability at the time, appointed to investigate the whole thing, well, the person who had actually approved the search warrant and that novel designation, which was Attorney General Eric Holder.
Wow.
I'll tell you quickly another facet to this story. The Washington Post broke the story on May 20, 2013, that the FBI and the State Department had been spying on James Rosen of Fox News, including monitoring my whereabouts, examining where and when I used my swipe badge at the State Department, all the phone records that we've talked about, the Gmails. That was May 20 of 2013. As it happened, Attorney General Holder, who quickly acknowledged that he was responsible for this extraordinary legal step that the United States government had never taken before, designating a working reporter as a criminal co-conspirator for doing his job. 5 days earlier, on May 15 of 2013, Attorney General Holder was testifying before the House Judiciary Committee, and he was asked about the potential prosecution of a member of the news media for the unauthorized disclosure of classified information. And I'm paraphrasing, but pretty closely. He said, in terms of the potential prosecution of a member of the news media for the unauthorized disclosure of classified information, which is something that goes on, by the way, every day in Washington. Bob Woodward is famous for having walked off White House grounds with classified maps.
They're doing it to Trump right now, all day, every day.
Okay, lots of classified information gets published. But Holder said, in terms of the potential prosecution of a member of the news media for the unauthorized disclosure of classified information, that's not something I've ever heard of, been involved in, or would think would be wise policy. And 5 days later, the Post broke the story of what was done to me.
So you're saying they're liars?
So I'm telling you that the majority staff of the House Judiciary Committee at the time, which was Republican, later issued a formal report concluding that Attorney General Holder's testimony on that occasion had been false and misleading. Shock of shocks, the D.C. bar did not rise up to immediately begin investigating whether the Attorney General should keep his law license. He was asked by Jonathan Capehart of MSNBC towards the end of his tenure what his biggest regret from his time as Attorney General was. And he said, the thing involving what's his name, the Fox reporter, Rosen, with this studied sort of nonchalance. That was one episode.
Well, I think that breaks down who you are.
Yeah, sure. There's more.
Well, we'll get into all that. We also, no Seamus tonight. We have Hannah Claire Brimlow hanging out.
Hi, I'm Hannah Claire Brimlow. I'm a writer for Timcast.com. I'm really looking forward to tonight.
Me too, because I'm back.
Yeah, you are back.
What's happening?
We have the same hair. Someone asked if I was Ian Carlson with straight hair.
Did you tell them no?
Of course not.
I think you take care of your hair more than he does.
Oh.
Man, I was just in Texas. I did Alex Stein's show. I was on with Sarah Gonzalez at the Blaze. If you guys didn't see it, you're going to want to check it out. Alex Stein is a wild, wild man. And it gave me a new lease on life, a new perspective, realizing that, Twitter isn't everything and that maybe your family is more important than the TV. But anyway, we were talking about music before the show, too, talking about the Beatles. James Rosen, the most dedicated Beatles fan on earth, I didn't know.
That's
until
right.
about 20 minutes ago.
It's breaking news here at Timcast.
Maybe we'll just talk about the Beatles.
Maybe we'll sing a little song.
Ian's back.
Good to see you, Tim.
Yeah.
And thanks for that coffee yesterday. It was delicious.
Yeah, the Roberto Jr.
Oh
stuff.
my gosh, got a
It's really good.
nutty. Yeah,
It's bright. It's a light roast.
I'm gonna
I
have
love
some
it.
more tomorrow.
I'm very much enjoying
We
it.
also have to my right, Serge Duprea.
Hey guys, yeah, let's get started.
All right, so here's the
Pardon me.
What was that? Here's the first story we got from the Washington Post. Ukraine denies Kremlin's claim of drone assassination attempt on Putin. Now, we have this video that was posted by the Times on YouTube. I'm going to play the clip for you. I don't think there's any audio. And you just see a weird little object fly in and then blow up. And that's it. So it exploded over the building. And I guess what happened was they destroyed it. You're not going to get a drone into the Kremlin. I mean, they've got air defenses. According to the Washington Post, they say Russia on Wednesday accused Ukraine of staging a drone attack intended to kill Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin, an incendiary allegation that was forcefully denied by Ukrainian officials, some of whom warned it could be a pretext for Russia to escalate the war. It is. It absolutely is. Whether or not it's a false flag, whether or not Ukraine actually did it, there's video. They claimed it happened, and that's what you're going to see. Some kind of escalation, some kind of justification. Perhaps it's Vladimir Putin trying to rally public support in his country for the ongoing war, or because he wants to turn the heat up and use more advanced weapons or something like that, and he needs some kind of justification. Or maybe Ukraine just tried to do it. Maybe it could be an insurgent faction. It could be a group of Ukraine. Who knows? But I wouldn't put it past them. I do kind of think this was crude and poorly done. So it's probably, I don't know, I'd assume more was a false flag.
Yeah, first I heard there were 2 drones and that they were brought down by Russian countermeasures. And so that was the drone actually coming down as a result of the Russian interference. So that, but I don't know if that was true or not either. I mean,
That's
it's all
what the
fog
Kremlin
of war.
said. They released a statement saying it was 2 unmanned aerial
2 drones
apparatuses. And they also said, we have May 9th, which is our Victory Day. We celebrate the end, or when Germany fell to the Soviet Union. And so this is lining up on sort of to be an attack on our national pride, basically.
This is basically the White House. It's like the Russian version of the White House. The Washington Post says it's the working residence of Vladimir Putin.
But to fly a drone, I mean, the explosion was very small compared to the building. Just to aim a thing into the top of the Kremlin, I don't see how that would get Putin. Maybe they knew where they were headed and they were trying to go right into his office.
I mean,
What
they
kind of-
said
what kind of
Putin
drone
wasn't
was
even
it?
there. They said that
He wasn't even there.
that he's
What kind of
unharmed.
drone was it is the question. Was it a small, commercial consumer drone or something? Or was it, an American military style Reaper or whatever?
Was it loaded with explosives or was that just the machine itself being blown apart?
Yo, I warned about this 10 years ago. This is crazy to see happen. I was doing research in 2011 on drone stuff, and when it was about 2014, I think, I actually went to the the Northwestern Drone Coalition. A group of universities were working with the government and news organizations to figure out what are we doing about this new technology. And when I went and met with these university people, I outright told them your biggest concern is probably security, because someone's going to take one of these things, they're going to arm it, and they're going to fly it straight into a city, and there is nothing you can do at that point. At that point, your question is, where does it blow up? Not if it will.
And swarm technology is the next level.
Right. Now we're seeing in Ukraine these small commercial style drones and military ones, but that are small, carrying explosives and payloads, swarming and just peppering targets and stuff like that.
You'll need like a laser defense system where like there's a pylon that if there's like 10,000 drones all coming, that the thing will like spark out 10,000 shocks and hit them all at once and knock them all down.
I don't think
you can't stop them individually.
It's not going to be able to move fast enough. If they did some kind of laser defense system, I think that could work. So you would need a high-powered laser, but it's not going to be able. Well, it could theoretically move fast enough, but to transfer enough energy from the laser to the drone to disable it might take more than just a second.
You would need huge amounts of energy for that.
It would point at it, hold for about a second, and probably take it out of the sky instantly, scramble it up, heat it up, overheat it. But if there's 10,000 of these drones or even a few hundred of them, this laser is not going to be able to stop all of them.
What vibe did you get, James, about this whole thing?
There's so much that we don't know, and our primary source of information about it, we have to remember, is the Kremlin, right? So even the video itself, it's intriguing to me that we're being allowed to see it. Why would the Russians release video of what they're claiming was almost a successful attack on the Kremlin, right?
It benefits them.
Well, maybe. So be that as it may, first, our only source of information is a very unreliable one, okay? As to the question of whether this could be the pretext for an escalation, whether it was a false flag or a genuine Ukrainian attack, the Russians haven't shown throughout this entire conflict that they need any particular pretext to escalate. The war itself is an enormous escalation, right? There was no conflict. So I don't think they particularly need any staged events or even a real event to claim as a justification for escalation. And the fact is, too, that the Russian military throughout this conflict has been so shockingly ineffective that I'm not sure that what escalations they can even successfully mount beyond the obvious one that we all worry about, which is the introduction of some kind of nuclear conventional or tactical or genuine nuke-sized nuclear escalation. I don't think they're going to go there. And so the one thing I would say about this is it brings up this posture of the United States throughout this conflict, which is that we are not encouraging or enabling the Ukrainian armed forces to launch attacks inside Crimea or Russia itself. And the question is, why not? Wouldn't the war be over much more swiftly if Vladimir Putin and the ruling class in Russia were made to pay those kinds of prices, the very prices the Ukrainians themselves are paying?
They want to avoid total war. They're seeking a limited war in eastern Ukraine. They don't want Putin to get killed. They don't want Zelensky to get killed because then it's Joe Biden's on the line. So I honestly think this is a way for the Russians to establish grievances in the global community and be like, see, now we have a little bit of justification if we do decide to go after Zelensky. So Zelensky, you better run. And he's like in Finland right now or something, and he decided to stay. I think he's up in some Nordic country.
I just want to say, if this really was a false flag, it is the saddest and most pathetic we've seen. I mean, you've got the burning of the Reichstag, which many people believe was a false flag to justify expansion of war and things like that. And that was literally burning the whole thing to the ground. This is like a little explosion overhead that didn't do much damage at all, and Putin wasn't even there. So I'm not sure what they get out of this, really. And so, some people I already see in the super chat are pointing out that there's no way those drones flew 400, 500 kilometers to make it there. So what is this?
They're like high altitude reconnaissance drones, maybe. They just got brought down by some sort of magnetic.
We're going to have to. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Hannah Claire. We're just going to have to acclimate ourselves to the reality that we're not going to learn all that we would wish to learn about this event. But just to your point before about the reason why the U.S. is just not encouraging or enabling Ukrainian armed forces to strike inside Russian territory is because they fear World War III. But it just seems to me you're already in a kind of a proxy war to begin with, right? And it's a strange way to pursue war making if your every decision is going to be governed by fear of the opponent escalating the conflict.
Aren't they enabling? Isn't the U.S. enabling by funding this war, though? I mean, we send materials and supplies to
We are
Ukraine.
the war.
So we are saying, oh, we're not enabling it, but we are.
Well, in other words, I don't know whether the particular weapon systems that we've been supplying would enable the Ukrainian armed forces to do damage inside territorial Russia. probably there's a suite of weapon systems we could supply that would guarantee the ability of the Ukrainians to pursue war on Russian targets. But again,
it's sort of an ambiguous line. We're saying we're not sure it could, but they theoretically could.
But they don't need.
I agree with you.
They don't need full-scale warfare weapons from us to engage in conflict on Russian territory, in Russian territory. In fact, that would probably be the least effective thing to do. The most effective thing to do is what that lady did when she brought the statue to that blogger and blew him up. Like insurgency style, targeted guerrilla warfare, disrupting the economy. I mean, they're not going to, there's nothing they're going to have that's going to be able to do enough damage to these areas.
And if they did, open strike on a Russian city would be a total annihilation of every Ukrainian major city by the Russian Air Force. It would just overnight, it would just be total war. The entire country would be leveled to the ground if they started attacking Russian cities.
This is the crazy thing to me about this whole thing. The restraint you see in war makes no sense. Like Ukraine could easily have more of these assassinations with the statue. You guys know about that story?
It's the first I've heard of it.
For those that don't know, there was this. I guess he was a vlogger. He was a guy who would he would propagandize in favor of Russia, and he was given a bust of himself, and it exploded, killing him and injuring several others. These are the kinds of attacks taking out key targets that are easier and more effective in terms of destabilizing,
and they
country.
instill terror, right? Because
exactly.
the populace wants to know, well, where's the next place that could be stricken?
But what you were saying, Ian, was that if Ukrainians did use U.S. granted or NATO granted weapons of war on a Russian city, Russia would retaliate with full-scale airstrikes. My question is, why don't they do it now?
Because they want to own the country. I think they really want trade out of this. They want to be a richer country after this war is over than before it started. So they're trying to take Eastern Ukraine east to the Donbass, run those freeways down to Crimea, and just start shipping steel out into the Mediterranean.
And I do want to stress there are U.S. boots on the ground. That was confirmed in the leaks that came out a while ago. Plus, there's several other European countries that have boots on the ground.
And Hannah Claire's point is true, which is, what distinction are you really making when on the one hand you're saying, well, we are proceeding very carefully up each step up the escalatory ladder so as not to trigger an unwelcome escalation from Mr. Putin, but 5 minutes later in the same news conference you're saying the weapons and the training that we're providing are killing Russian soldiers, are causing all these extraordinary casualties that the Russians are absorbing. So in essence, you're boasting about the very thing that you're claiming not to be doing.
But realistically, I think, utilitarianly, they care a lot less about losing humans than they do about losing infrastructure. You blow up buildings, that's going to piss them off a lot more than killing a bunch of dudes.
But again,
overpopulation.
At what point should the entire Western alliance be governed by fear of whether this particular leader is going to go nuclear? Does he not also subscribe to MAD, to mutually assured destruction, which governed relations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union for 50 years?
I think that's fake.
What's fake?
Mutually assured destruction, in my opinion, is completely overhyped and confused by the average person. Because people tend to simplify things and because their views are based off of pop culture and not actual history, they think things like, gunshots, they don't know what they really sound like. They think, it's like that movie Last Action Hero. Remember that with Arnold
Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis.
He shoots the taxi in the real.
No, that's True Lies.
He lives in the movie, but then he comes to the real world and he shoots the car, but nothing happens because in movies you shoot a car, it explodes for no reason. And so what you have with mutually assured destruction is this idea based on intercontinental ballistic missiles that if Russia were to nuke a U.S. city, we would fire a nuke in return in retaliation, and then the whole world just blows itself up. I don't believe that's true, and I believe that's a myth. And I also believe
is it a myth that there's a second strike capability?
What do you mean?
In other words,
if we get nuked, we will launch nukes.
Well, in other words, what you just identified as preposterous or whatever is the idea that if we are fired upon with a nuclear weapon, we will fire one back, and then the whole world goes boom. Isn't it possible that we clip off the end of that, the whole world going boom? And there's, do you believe, just as a threshold matter, that if we are attacked with a nuclear weapon, we have a second strike, what's called a second strike capability, the ability to launch the second nuclear strike and retaliate?
I think there's so much wrong with the presumption. First, there's that famous story of the Russian submarine that received word that a nuke had been launched. And the guy in this one, I guess, what did he do? He refused to launch it. Is the story? Was that what it was?
Yeah, I'm gonna pull his name up.
Pull that up and get us the story correct, because I could be getting it wrong. But even when it was like, they have attacked us, the nukes are heading towards us, he goes, I won't fire it. I won't do it. And so that was this legendary story, or urban legend, whatever you want to call it, historical legend. Do you know?
Basically, he believed that there was an error because a lot of Soviet tech at the time was not as
Are you sure that he believed it was an error? My understanding was that he refused to fire even when ordered to.
It could be both, but from what I remember that story that you're talking about, he was like I think it was a sub. He was on a sub, I believe. Yeah, and he believed that it was an error. It wasn't actually the beginning of a nuclear war. But
there was a movie about this whole subject, Failsafe, where the American pilots have been given word that we've been attacked, and they're reluctant to be the ones that actually. But that's why you have command, and you have a chain of command and so on. But
his name was Vasily Alexandrovich Arkhipov, and he refused to authorize the captain to fire nuclear torpedoes at the U.S.
What
Navy.
year was that?
Wow, I'm surprised. It's not there.
So there was a
1947.
I think it was a British MP or someone in Europe said, you would be insane to sacrifice London or New York for Warsaw or something. That if Vladimir Putin were to use, and especially Kiev, if Vladimir Putin were to use intercontinental ballistic missiles, we're talking multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles with 12 warheads peppering every major city in Ukraine, I do not believe anyone in the West would fire upon Russia with nuclear weapons. And if Vladimir Putin were to actually fire an intercontinental ballistic missile at Poland, I do not believe the West would launch nuclear ICBMs in retaliation at Russia.
As they are legally required to come to the defense of that.
Required to come to the defense does not mean firing nukes at civilian targets.
But why is MAD so MAD is a fallacy, or is a popular delusion because why?
Well, I think it's more complicated than people think. They think that if Russia were to launch a nuke, then like in that movie, was it War Games with Matthew Broderick, all the nukes go flying in the air. And I just don't think that's reality, because the reality of strategy in war is not that some dude sitting at a computer and he's like, well, a nuke was fired, better fire ours.
But I will say, if it was World War II, if the Japanese had nuclear bombs, that they probably would have dropped them back on the United States after Nagasaki.
Perhaps, but those were gravity bombs. So the very first nuclear weapons were dropped out of bombers. And after we knew the capabilities, the Germans knew the capabilities of nuclear bombs. And there was a rush to weaponize this, and we got there first. The United States, knowing the capability of a gravity bomb, seeing a bomber with fighters on its wing, they'd be like, stop that bomber. And we would definitely be prepared for something like that.
But we shouldn't allow geography, I think, to govern our assessments in this area, so that if it's simply the fact that the United States and Russia are so far away from each other, and it would require intercontinental ballistic missiles for this kind of exchange to occur, let's shrink our example to India and Pakistan. Okay, which are not as far away from each other and are both nuclear armed, and which have a history of conflict with each other. Okay, do you believe that mutually assured destruction theory obtains in that theater? We
need to break down what it really means. In that there is the reality that if Vladimir Putin fired an ICBM. A MIRV, for instance. A nuclear-armed, multiple independently targeted reentry vehicle with 12 warheads. It goes up into the air, ejects 12 warheads to pepper the eastern seaboard of the United States. The United States would absolutely fire in retaliation.
Okay.
But that is an oversimplification of what nuclear war likely will be. So in your example with India and Pakistan, we're not talking about a 8,000 mile launch of an ICBM into space, which we all know is coming, and then be like, there it is, and we know it's heading for us. We can't stop it. Fire. What I think that the mistake is that when you talk about nuclear war, people only think one thing: an ICBM launching from a silo in the ground in Siberia or in Oklahoma and then flying through the air. When in reality, what's likely going to happen is Vladimir Putin, when he escalates to nuclear war, is going to take nuclear artillery, and he's probably going to use lower yield gravity bombs, 100 kiloton, maybe even getting to the point of a megaton. These are much, much smaller these days, and attacking Ukraine to win if he has to. no one in the West is going to retaliate with a nuclear strike on Russia if Russia uses nukes to win the war in Ukraine.
However, our leaders in the present government, including the National Security Advisor at the White House, let's say Jake Sullivan, have stated many times that they have communicated to the Kremlin through the channels they have, and they have them, that very, very severe consequences would befall Mr. Putin and his government if any kind of nuclear weapon were introduced into this conflict.
And that's not a U.S. retaliatory strike on Russia.
Right.
So
what would you imagine would be our most severe response?
Sanctions. If Russia introduced, the most severe, I'd imagine, is a U.S. declaration of war. And
no, I mean really could actually imagine taking place.
Right, yeah. I think there's a strong possibility that if Vladimir Putin were to use tactical nuclear artillery or small, lower yield weapons, nuclear weapons in Ukraine, that NATO would formally declare war and the U.S. would enter the war and have a strong, probably generate a decent amount of public support if they come out and say, they just use nukes. We're not going to, the world will not be destroyed. We must stop this madman. And I think that's very likely. So Putin may be concerned that if he escalates to that point, he gives a casus belli to the West to directly invade and engage. Right now, it's relatively passive what the U.S. is doing. That being said, Putin is not playing a game to lose. And if pushed to that brink, I genuinely believe he will be like, well, it's either I lose now or I lose against NATO in a year. Fire the nukes. But we'll see. I don't know.
One aspect of this is that his military is so depleted as a result of this catastrophic,
I don't believe it,
misadventure.
Yeah. Those leaks showed that the amount of casualties was substantially less than they'd been reporting. And what was it actually?
But wasn't that supposed to have been doctored? Wasn't that the one part of the document that was supposed to have been
so much
altered?
fog of war?
I perhaps, but I just think it's fascinating, this idea that Russia, which is a massive economy, would be losing to the only country that's become poorer since the fall of the Soviet Union.
But they're not just fighting that country. They're obviously fighting a coalition that's supplying them and training them and so on.
U.S. veterans and volunteers.
Look, you don't have to be a military analyst or have military experience to assess this conflict and to be able to discern accurately that it hasn't gone well for Russia, and that it, what was the operating premise of both the Russians and the West at the start of the conflict was that it wasn't going to last very long, and that they would, if they had the gumption, if they had the nerve to launch this kind of violence, kinetic military violence in Europe, which hasn't seen this kind of thing since World War II, if he was willing to cross that line, he was going to have an easy time capturing Kyiv and deposing the Zelensky government.
Well, Putin's problem was that he sat back and let NATO expand for decades. And that was Russia's problem. And it's like only now they're willing to engage in military conflict. They've basically lost at this point. It's the craziest thing to me that you would lose, 50% of the conflicted territory and then decide to fight. It's like, well, you lost already, bro.
Well, but also
like
look
they
at
already got your border with Estonia and Latvia. Now you're mad because of Ukraine and Gazprom.
But also look at the reliance on the Wagner Group, okay, which shouldn't be necessary for a world-class military. And who is the Wagner Group? They're plucking convicts out of prisons and throwing them there. And even the after the call-up order that went down in September, I think it was, which met with some extraordinary displays of resistance on the streets of Moscow and elsewhere. The reports are that, and this is also verified by interception of signal communications between soldiers at the front and their families and so on. But they are throwing even the conscripts into battle without the sufficient gear, making them pay for their own helmets. They can't even feed them. Their quartermastership alone has been an absolute catastrophe.
We heard the same thing about Ukraine. There was that guy last year or whatever who tried to volunteer and then said it was a disaster. People need to have guns, and they were like, "If you leave, we'll shoot you" or whatever.
But we ought to be more surprised hearing it about the Russian military.
Considering, but I think you do make the point. NATO it's basically Russia versus NATO, and Ukraine's being propped up by us. I want to jump to this story, and we'll pull this one into the culture war. Let's start with this from the Post Millennial. U.S. Army expected to miss recruitment goal again in 2023. Oh boy, I sure hope we don't actually enter World War III with Russia, considering we're not hitting our recruitment goals. I got it. Maybe there's something we can do to drum up support among young people and inspire them to be the heroes of tomorrow, to stop the madman that is Vladimir Putin. Perhaps, I don't know, drag queens. From Fox News, U.S. Navy platformed drag queen influencer to attract youth to military and hiring crisis. Oh, Jesus.
You're supposed to inspire young, overly testosterone-filled dudes to go want to blow stuff up to join the military, not
Tom
change
Cruise
their
just
gender.
gave you the second Top Gun, and this is how you follow up?
Yeah, seriously. Top Gun, one of the best recruitment videos ever. The hero's journey. And I see this story, and you know what my response is to it? I don't care if you want to be a drag queen, by all means, go ahead and do your thing, but it's a hobby. That's not something you sign up for military service to do.
Yeah, it'd be like talking about how many girls you ran through or something, and be like, "Oh yeah, I slept with 15 women last year. Join the army." And you'd be like me. Like that doesn't get.
I mean, yeah,
maybe that would get guys to join.
That probably would. It'd be like, really, women, dig guys in uniform, huh? This is like you're not getting laid. You're going to a show to watch a man dressed like a woman sing songs. I don't think that's a reason to join the Navy.
Just, I see the photograph and all I can say is how far we've come from when Bob Hope used to bring Raquel Welch over to Vietnam to entertain the troops, and she seemed, I'm just going to say, I've seen photos and some films of that. It seems like she was well received on those occasions. Why wouldn't they just stick with that formula?
You know what I said when I saw this story? Everyone's complaining about it. And I was like, isn't the Navy notoriously stereotyped for being gay? Like
the whole village people
the
thing.
Navy. Yeah, in the Navy. And then I'm just like, this is not at all surprising to me. But
they're like, we'll just play to it. It'll be fine.
But in all seriousness, when we're seeing recruitment shortages, it is kind of alarming that they're like, I know what's going to make young men want to sacrifice their lives for the United States. Drag queens.
Less than 1% of the population.
I think they're just trying to give drag queens work. They're trying to say, like, we have this surplus of drag queens and they can do anything. They can recruit for the military and they can read to your kids. They can do it all. You should be excited to have a drag queen in your neighborhood.
What they got to be doing is indoctrinate kids via video games. They got to give really awesome VR or free video games, free download, make it addictive and awesome, and then be like, join the military now.
They had these video games.
Yeah, America's Army was
now
one of them.
Imagine you get Call of Duty 6 or whatever number they're on, and it's like the story starts and the guy's like, I was on the ship when Harpy Daniels did a performance, and then you're watching a drag queen and you're like, I don't feel inspired to die. Like, I don't to go to war to save my country. You know what the male power fantasy is more like? If they had a guy just like Spider-Man, it'd probably be a lot better. Literally have a guy just like Spider-Man and do a backflip would be better recruitment than a drag queen.
This brings to mind the statement of Mike Huckabee when he was one of the candidates against Donald Trump in 2016, and they still were having large debates with the whole field of candidates. And Huckabee said on that occasion something fairly close to this: the United States military is not a laboratory for social experimentation, okay? It has one mission, which is to preserve and defend the national security and territorial sovereignty of the United States. And I think I would wait a long time if I waited for somebody in the Pentagon to explain to me how that photo comports with that mission.
There needs to be congressional hearings and dishonorable discharges or stripping of rank or something for the people who are responsible for this. You've already got the meme of the Russian. Have you seen the Russian military ad?
Yes.
Where it's like this dude's all ripped and he jumps out of a plane and then lands, in the snow, and he puts the mask on. He's got the gun, and it's like, you are going to be a hero in Russia. Then you get the American ads, and it's like, I have 2 moms and I'm a drag queen, and it's like, man, look. They may not have the resources. They may be having a hard time with they're using old tanks now and they're recycling old weapons. But we're having a personnel problem.
Yeah, we literally cannot get enough people to go to boot camp, not just because of ads like this and an apathy, but also because people don't qualify. There are more people turned away because they are overweight or they struggle with a mental health disorder, they have a drug use problem, that do not qualify for the military. I mean, the DoD put out this report saying basically it's like, I want to say 200,000 people every year that qualify to join the military. And of those, around less than 10% actually have an interest in joining. I mean, it is a minuscule population who I really think we should just talk to and say, hey, did this commercial with a drag queen seem appealing to you? Like, where is the basic marketing study where they gather a bunch of people who successfully did the thing they wanted and say, would these appeal to you if you had to do it again? Because I don't think this would work.
It's so profoundly offensive. And it's not so much the drag queen thing, because I'm like, I don't care if people want to do that and have, gay men's burlesque. It's America, man. You go live your life, do what you want to do. What's offensive is that they're advertising the Navy is a silly nonsense place to be of irresponsibility. Mm-hmm. It's like if they made a commercial and they were like, join the Navy so that you can hang out with your buddies and drink beer and watch the game, I'd be like, that's also bad.
It's not for
Granted,
fun.
This is worse, but
I mean, honestly, you want to dress in drag, fine, but not while you're in the service. You're in uniform there. Maybe on your private time, but not while you're on duty.
That's the other thing. There's photos of this dude protesting, and I'm like, is he allowed to do that as a Navy serviceman? Protest holding up a sign for abortion?
Look, I think we all agree that this is not the answer to the recruitment problem, right? And so, there at a threshold level, we condemn those who thought that this somehow would be the answer to that problem. But if you really want to look at the actual root of the problem itself, it gets to what you said earlier, I think, which is you were talking about what's going to motivate a young person to join the military, which is an all-volunteer institution, to potentially give up their lives, right? Give up their lives for what?
Batman.
For something much larger than themselves, right? It has to be something larger than themselves. And as we are, as a society, tearing down everything that the United States has always historically meant, okay, you're going to see fewer people want to lay down their lives for what remains of that definition of a country.
Who wants to lay down their lives for this?
Well, it's this identity thing. The military is not about establishing personal identity. It's about giving up your personal identity for the group.
Well, and I will say, the Surgeon General just came out with this report saying we have the next public health crisis is loneliness and social isolation. Do you know what branches of the military are successfully reaching their quotas? It's the Marine Corps, it's NASA, it's things that people feel like they are part of something bigger. We can identify our problem and yet we don't apply it to the institution that apparently needs it most, the military recruitment. The Air Force struggles, all reservists struggle, the Army struggles, the Navy struggles, but yet something that has a really strong core identity, the Marines and again Space Force, they are doing okay. They're not doing great, but they are making their quotas.
Trump needs to get reelected and fire all of these people. Just strip them and boot them out. You want to know what you need to make? You want a commercial right now? You need some real propaganda. Here's what you do. You make a video of a guy in Ukraine and a Russian soldier is, firing on some soldiers, and then the guy grabs a child and runs from an explosion and then gives the child to the mother who's crying and thanks him, and he's like, go, go, go. And then the guy turns around and runs into battle in slow motion, and it's like, be the hero, join the army.
Yeah, but it's got to be like an invasion of Alaska and it be like, don't let it happen here.
So anything better than a guy dressing up like a woman and dancing. Like that's no young man is being like, wow, that's why I want to go to a battlefield and die.
Elephant in the room, man, when they discharged all these people out of the military during this COVID crisis, and it was like the most based, hardcore dudes that were like, I'm not putting that, you cannot make me. I'm here to serve my country. Leave me alone. Let me do my job. And now they were just kicked out. Now they're just men and women. And now they're all pissed off the United States. Like they're going to come back.
I think this is us losing the war, right? Sun Tzu says, win the war before you start it, before fighting it. So right now we have recruitment problems, and the best they can come up with this. China's like looking at, Xi Jinping's looking at his watch like, don't invade Taiwan yet. Let's let them fester for a little bit. Oh, they're doing the drag queen thing? Okay, now we're good.
Yeah, once we miss military recruitment goals for the 5th year in a row, then we'll move in. I mean, I feel like this is so obvious and it's happening very publicly. America is such a culture, exports its culture at such a high level that there's no way that this is not part of anyone's calculation, thinking, wow, they don't have a healthy population. Their young people are have higher rates of depression than anyone else. They are not looking to join the military. They are feeling isolated. They are a weak country. And therefore, we know that ultimately, if we can hold on long enough, we can tip the scales in our favor. Like, that's a very terrifying thought.
Weakness is provocative, as they say.
What's the Chinese military looking like right now? How are their tanks?
Massive.
Yeah, I would imagine.
They have a great commercial.
How's our border defense in Alaska? How's the Canadian border defense on the border of Alaska there? Because if the Chinese decide to join this war,
Right. And Canada has a very, very small military.
And Trudeau would just absolutely be deferential to China.
they would have no choice. They could roll into the capital, into Alberta. I mean, the American military would be on the ground, but like,
Doesn't Russia border Canada?
it's
Russia
all very
border
close.
Canada?
Russia and Alaska.
From Alaska.
From Alaska.
From
as
Sarah Palin's house.
Sarah Palin told us.
And if Taiwan becomes a point of
She
contention,
never actually said that, but
Technically, Tina
on
Fey,
Saturday
yeah.
Night Live,
like,
I thought it was in some New Yorker profile.
no, she
it's-
said that when it comes, so the actual context of what Sarah Palin said was to be vice president, she would be in a good position considering Alaska actually negotiates with Russia over the Bering Strait.
Right.
And in fact, from the westernmost part of Alaska, you can see Russia. So they're often dealing with trade negotiations as Russian ships are moving through these territories. And then Tina Fey went on Saturday Night Live and went, I can see Russia from my house. Then every Democrat was like, I can't believe Sarah Palin said that.
But that was also true. George W. Bush gave a speech where he was like, who came up with this word? Because actually, is it Will Ferrell or one of the comedians?
Yeah.
He was the one who came up with strategery, and
Right.
George W. Bush was like,
Got
oh.
stuck with it.
Yeah, he gave a good speech where he was like, too bad. I wish I'd come up with that one.
I'm of the observation that we need to negotiate peace right now, and if that means concessions to the Russian army and giving them a piece of Ukraine, if we don't and we escalate, the Chinese will invade Taiwan with Russia as their ally. So we're better off ending this thing with Russia so that China's afraid to go into Taiwan because they'll suffer the same kind of losses that the Russians suffered.
What do you think about Taiwan?
I'm not I think an argument could be made either way along what the lines that Ian was just sketching out, which is to say, Ian's point is, if I understood it correctly just now, was if we secure a diplomatic resolution to this conflict right now, that makes it more difficult for China to launch an invasion of Taiwan. Whereas you could say that the greater demonstration of resistance that the West puts up in Ukraine will be more likely to convince China of the resistance they would face if they moved on Taiwan.
I think that if we produce too much resistance in Ukraine, that China will have they'll have a choice, but they'll choose to join the war. If the United States continues to push, the Chinese and the Russians, they're already building another economy. They're ready to take control of the world right now. And if we don't end this, it's going to escalate into a multi-faction war. And then just like Hitler took Poland after Mussolini took North Africa, China will take Taiwan, just like Russia's trying to take Ukraine.
Let me ask you
I think
guys
it's inevitable.
But it's better off if we just get China alone trying to act. Like pushing Russia and China together is insane.
I'm just saying, get out of cities, homeschool your kids, get some chickens, start a little garden, because watching the drag queen Navy thing, I've kind of lost all faith in the U.S. military's capabilities, to be completely honest.
I think the resistance that's been shown to Russia is enough to prove to China that there's going to be insane resistance in Taiwan if some sort of military incursion.
I'm not
we
so
don't need to
convinced anymore.
keep it up, in
Correct.
other words, is what you're saying.
If you came to me and said, do you think the United States would win? I know. Sorry, recruitment goals missed for 5 years? Is that where we're
I don't
going?
think it's 5 years. I think it's
4.
The United States
3
could
or
win a
4.
defensive war. But I mean, what's that? A bunch of destroyed cities and dead armies? Like,
I mean, you look at the crime, you look at the defecation on the streets of American cities. You look at the banking crisis; these banks are collapsing. I don't feel confident that if a war started, the U.S. would do anything successfully. I think it would just crumble like a house of cards.
Let me ask a question. Should we regard that the Chinese communist state is foreordained to failure for the same reason that the Soviet Union failed, which is to say it is morally bankrupt at its core?
Like that's why we are going to fail, because we're morally bankrupt?
No, I'm saying, do you regard the Chinese enterprise, however strong they might seem in the moment, however much they build up their military, that ultimately the Chinese enterprise is foreordained to failure because it is morally bankrupt at its core?
in a
Well,
world
it's a
of
moot
peace-
point, because the United States is morally bankrupt at its core as well. So what, they both just fail? Perhaps the war ends up wiping everybody out.
So you are engaging in what they call moral equivalence. You're saying the U.S. and China are equally morally bankrupt at their core.
Yes.
I think
but I don't understand your point.
I think the reason the Soviet Union failed is because they couldn't withstand the peace. We stayed at peace for too long. They were ready to do some crazy war, and we prevented it. But the Chinese are ready for war.
I think it had to do with their economic system being a total failure.
Yeah, the
and
Chinese
their
are the same
inability
way.
to. But China uses capitalist mechanisms with a totalitarian communist party controlling all of these things to have rapid expansion, and they've got a lot of people. And what they'll do is they'll put the Communist Party in every major corporation to control it, but let it function to a certain degree. Give it capitalist free reign, but always make sure you've got your tendrils in it so it can't go outside of your control.
Which is a Potemkin village. Any effort at economic liberalization without political actual democratization is a Potemkin village, right? It's not. Nobody believes the Chinese assessments as to their GDP rates. You know,
Right.
nobody.
Their property values are ridiculous. It's all fake.
In other words, if you have freedom until you reach the boundary of the Communist Party, then you don't really have freedom. And I don't care if you're calling that market reforms or whatever. But to the point of whether, this moral equivalence, it brings to mind a favorite quote of mine from William F. Buckley Jr., who used to say when in the 70s when people would say, oh, the CIA and the KGB are the same guys. They wear different colored trench coats like in Spy v Spy, but like they do the same things. And Buckley would say, men who push old ladies into the way of an onrushing bus and men who push old ladies out of the way of an onrushing bus, it seems to me ought not to be grouped together as men who go around pushing old ladies around.
So what happened when the federal government went to that woman in Alaska's house because she looked like another woman on January 6th and they raided her home? I understand that China's operating these Uyghur concentration camps and doing very, very horrible things that we're not doing. But my view is, while China may be morally bankrupt to a substantially worse degree, the United States has no leg to stand on. We've got a corrupt government that's been corrupt. It's been the country's been extracted for its value, its labor being extracted for decades. You've got interests in the United States working with China to send our labor over there. You've got Joe Biden flying on Air Force Two with his son to do private equity deals with China. The United States at this point is a shell of whatever it may have been 100 years ago.
The federal government for sure, but the states are powerful, especially some of them.
And many of the
But look at
states
the
are
growth-
aborting kids at 9 months and giving and sterilizing children.
But look at the growth of Timcast. Look at this extraordinary operation. In what other country would this have happened?
I don't think it could have in any country other than the United States.
But look, we have a modicum of influence and power compared to even CNN. And it's funny because people might
Right,
be...
but you just got started in relative terms. I mean, they've been around since 1980.
Sure. I mean, you look at a lot of the big networks and what happens? YouTube will suppress us every step of the way. And the tactic they have is you censor shows like ours at 49% and prop up shows like CNN at 51%. So in the long run, you fail and they succeed. They will absolutely make sure that what happens fits the corporate algorithmic structure, which is moral decay and a psychotic expansion of the woke cult. The United States may very well succeed in many regards. I'm not completely... I don't think the United States will cease to exist. I think what's going to happen is if there is a large-scale global war of some sort, we're not winning it. The petrodollar will fall. The economic standing of the United States will be wiped out. We will lose our control on military bases in many other countries. Most of the military bases probably will collapse and fall into the control of the countries that they're in. And then the people who are smart enough to get out of cities and start taking care of themselves will probably succeed. And then we'll see a new generation of people in the United States building up, becoming economically resilient, starting businesses. It will not be like the U.S. just ceases to function. But as a global unipolar world, it's done. China, we're now multipolar. It's now China, the U.S. Russia is clearly, either. I don't think Russia's going to fall. Russia's probably going to work with China. We may see some grand war, but I don't see how the U.S. actually is able to pull through, considering what we're witnessing now internally and in our own military. Nobody wants to join. Young people are completely disaffected. Their brains are shattered by nonsense, garbage, social media algorithmic crap. Like, they actually believe Marxism makes sense because they don't know what they're talking about. You see these videos of young people saying the stupidest things you've ever heard, and you're like, man, Greta Thunberg, I mean, she's not American, but she's outright saying kill 60 million people overnight when she says, we must end fossil fuels now, we're not going to wait. It's like, okay, yeah, if you ended fossil fuels right now, like New York just banned natural gas, these people, their brains are broken.
This is the
They're completely
demoralization.
broken.
This is
Absolutely.
Yuri Bezmenov talks a lot about this.
They've been wrapped up on this social media algorithmic garbage that tells them whatever the algorithm promotes, that's what you must adhere to. So these young people see climate change as bad. Then you end up with a politician saying, tell me what to do so you'll vote for me. And they say, ban natural gas. And he goes, okay, no more gas stoves. Are you kidding? Natural gas is a large component of how we generate electricity. How about we do nuclear power? No, these people are too moronic because of what they read on the internet to know nuclear power is clean and actually the best way to generate electricity. So I see in this country, the cities are corrupt. They're decaying. The federal government is corrupt. It's in decay. Our best chance, in my opinion, is probably Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, maybe a Trump DeSantis ticket, but that's going to require a serious amount of force to go in and start arresting and criminally charging the corrupt politicians who are doing insider trading, who are illegally targeting American citizens with in unjust criminal probes. They're going to have to start firing all the bureaucrats, and that's a decade-long project plus. You can't reverse 50 years of corruption overnight. And the problem with all of that is while Trump may want to do it, he's facing resistance from nightmare zombie politicians who just want to get in office so they can buy and trade stock while the Titanic sinks. I am not confident in the federal government outside of the United States, and I'm not confident that we are going to be the dominant unipolar power. I don't even think we're going to be a superpower in 20 or 30 years.
There's one word that did not appear in it in all that you said. God.
Mm-hmm. There's a strong lack thereof in this country.
In other words, if you regard that the cities are corrupt and you regard that the federal government is corrupt, those are two large sectors right there, right, of our society, federal government, municipal government. What does that leave? You've got business, right, which I presume you also regard as hopelessly corrupt and woke.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's not even about woke. It's just mindlessly corrupt and has been.
Okay.
Obsession.
So then there's, traditionally anyway, there was one other major power center in this country that had the ability to move people, to motivate people, and even to feed people, and that was the churches, right?
Gone.
And faith. And so that's why I bring it up.
Yeah, we need a sea change. We need a collective consciousness, something to change.
This country has experienced a severe moral and communal decay over the past couple decades. And these past 10 years have been a rapid acceleration of it, to the point where starting around 2016, 2017, you started to see serious conversations in corporate press about civil war and the real prospect of it. A Princeton professor coming on, I think it was like MSNBC, saying we are in a cold civil war. You start seeing factions fighting in the streets. You're seeing crime running rampant in all of our major cities with no willpower to do anything about it. In fact, in Chicago, despite the fact that crime is increasing and people don't feel safe there, they elected an even further left politician. So that's why I say get out of these cities. Do I think we as the United States will get through this? I really do. But the night is always darkest before the dawn. If you want to stay in these places, it's going to get bad. If China wants to take Taiwan, we may resist, but they're probably going to get it. I just, looking at how the federal government is acting, what I see as our best path forward is Trump getting in office, following through with Schedule F. We need some serious criminal justice action. I'm talking getting an AG who starts going department to department and issuing criminal indictments on, say, people in the FBI for targeting American citizens with trumped up BS and ignoring the far left extremists who have done comparable things or worse things.
I believe, though, that if he did that without the consciousness, the will of the consciousness, he'd be killed by the CIA overnight, and then nobody would get fired.
That's a black pill.
I think we need to rename this show the Grimcast. I think that's where we're at.
Regarding
Some
what you're
nights
saying,
are more black pill than others.
So God, you brought up God. If we were to start believing in God as a culture again, God doesn't win wars. God doesn't build businesses. How would understanding God and bringing people together under that help us become a society?
God provides fuel for those enterprises. When we talk about belonging to something larger than ourselves, God encompasses that, in my view.
Unified moral focus. If everyone said, we all agree, look, I'll put it this way. We've talked to many people who are religious. I am not a Christian. I do believe in God, but I firmly believe, and this is obvious, if every single person in this country had the same faith, you wouldn't really need law enforcement. You would to a small degree, but you wouldn't have to worry too much if everyone 100% was faithful.
Or practiced.
That's practiced.
Yeah.
If everybody was devout 100%, there would be absolutely no need for law enforcement at all.
If men were angels, we would have no need of government. Right. Yeah.
And so what you actually end up getting is, to varying degrees, a large portion of a population having one moral framework, and thus you don't see a lot of crime. But then you have some people who just genuinely don't care, or through crimes of desperation commit crime. So you'll need some kind of law enforcement or policing or communal watch or defense or something like that. Right now, what we have is a completely shattered social infrastructure with no moral framework at all. And woke people, these younger people that are growing up, have no moral framework at all. Mm-hmm. We here on this show have a solidly, whether any liberal or whatever wants to admit it, in the United States, a solidly Christian moral framework. I bring this up very often. Bill Maher has a Christian moral framework in his worldview. He believes in the presumption of innocence, which is rooted in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is where Blackstone's formulation comes from, which is where we get our Fifth Amendment and Fourth Amendment and other amendments. But you look at the woke generation now, you look at the younger generation, they don't care about any of that. They've actually come out against the Constitution. They have protested saying we should get rid of it. They don't believe in fundamental rights because they don't have the same moral framework we do. Their moral framework is rooted in the fascistic view, there is no truth but power.
I believe this.
We have to win that war.
Like Judaism I'm finding myself more Jewish by the day. And I think what's happened is these global banking cartels are sometimes run by people with Jewish ancestry, and they might not even believe in God, but they call themselves Jewish, and they're poisoning the name of the Jew and taking credit for something that I want to see it. I want to see you behave like a Jew. If you are, you show me. It's about, you don't worship money. Like, how can you fathom setting up a bank and taking interest from people that they can't afford?
I think part of it is the young.
Well, the banks are collapsing, but anyway, you were saying.
I think the youngest generation is so lost because we are a culture that didn't safeguard our morals. I understand objections to organized religions. People feel like any institution, churches can become corrupt, but we didn't raise children in a collective understanding of what's good and what's wrong. We raised children in a culture that said, push your boundaries constantly. Anything is whatever you want it to be. It was a very ambiguous time, and this has been going on since the 80s. And I think as a result, we have a generation of people who are, in many respects, hopeless and lost. And that is a very difficult thing to come back from because bitterness is a pill you can't unswallow.
Let me show you this story from CNN. I want to talk about this Tucker Carlson thing. Tucker Carlson sent a racist text to a producer, quote, "It's not how white men fight." Silly. You have this story, what's his name? Abby something Grossman is her name, I guess?
Grossberg.
Grossberg, there you go. And she was coming out being like, oh, they were so bad to me, they were so awful. So what happens is Tucker Carlson releases a text where he says, I saw this video of Proud Boys beating up an Antifa guy, and I started getting into it, saying I could taste it, and then I realized, I shouldn't be thinking these things. This is bad. I don't want to be in this place. Here's what CNN does. They show the first part of the quote that makes it look like Tucker is just bloodthirsty. They then give you this massive story about Fox and Dominion and text messages and a lawsuit and settlement before they give you the actual quote, which is Tucker saying, these are bad things. We shouldn't think these things. And that's my point. Because what happens is people will read the first quote. Once they get down to the part about Dominion, old news from a month ago, they'll just stop reading. I think about this person, Abby Grossberg, and this is what this nation has raised people to be. Mindless self-indulgence. They see that you can be popular by saying whatever the machine wants you to say. They are quite literally slaves to the AI already. If they can get likes from it, they'll say it. They don't care what it is. If they don't get likes from it, they won't say it, even if it's right.
Like an episode of Black Mirror.
Absolutely. And so now what you have is a generation of people who are like, don't know, don't care. I will say whatever gets traffic. And there's this really funny clip. Actually, let me pull it up because I have it. And it's from Tim Dillon's podcast that perfectly exemplifies the vapid, despicable nature of these young people. Here we go. I'm going to pull this up right here. Let me play this clip for you guys.
To be honest, it's actually really hard in this space, right? Like we have 45 seconds to record a video, keeping people's attention. And a lot of the people on our side, if they start hearing, I've actually done it before. I've criticized Democrats, specifically Hakeem Jeffries, and it all just went south. Like I started losing followers. Like it's bad, right? And I really want to be that person that like reaches the other side, because Democrats, I mean, they're horrible at their jobs, right? They do a lot of shitty things, although I'll vote for them all the time. But it's also hard in the space to criticize them.
That's a good, can we clip that quote? They're horrible at their jobs. They do shitty things.
Please don't clip that. Please, no, please, to be honest, like.
He legit was like, no, please don't clip that, please. And when I first heard this kid said that, I thought it was him more snarkily being like, don't clip it, come on, guys. But he actually sounds scared. And this is it. These two young men, they're paid by a talent agency that gets money from the DNC. They go on the internet and just say mindless, vapid, garbled nonsense that sounds like politics, but has no bearing in reality. They get followers from it. If they deviate from that line, they lose followers. We can have Luke Rudkowski come on this show and rant about how he doesn't like Donald Trump, and people still like and follow Luke Rudkowski. Because whatever space we're in, we're more interested in having an honest conversation and explaining our ideas, even if it challenges my or someone else's opinion. People will still be like, well, I want to hear what these people think and why. That whole thing is a cult. And this is what young people are being raised to do. It doesn't matter what Tucker Carlson was actually trying to say. What matters is, how can we extract cult responses? How can we extract followers? Zombies. I don't see how the United States remains a dominant power, if it even still is, if half or more of this country are either lazy, ignorant, willfully or willfully manipulative like these young men.
Even 30%. You about to say something?
I personally recoil from generational disparagement. You know,
It's because you have children and you want to believe they can take the future back.
No, my kids are irretrievable. No, only because, you know, we could talk about kind of Pajama Guy. I don't know if you remember that. It was from like, I don't know, maybe it was the Obama era. And there were ads that were created to promote Obamacare. And one of them showed this sort of effete-looking guy in his pajamas, and he was dressed in red flannel pajamas, and he had a little cup of Java, and he had sort of horn-rimmed glasses.
Yeah. Yes, I think we talked about this.
Okay,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, we pulled this up recently.
So it might be tempting to sort of to write off the current generation of young people as Pajama Guy, or they're just completely wrapped up in their artificial cocoon of their phones and social media and everything else. But just getting older, I recognize that these are glib distinctions to say that one generation had grit and understood, and this generation doesn't.
And that's a fact, though.
Yeah, never be the guy that's like, kids today.
You can't compare any of the generations since World War II.
Well, the kids that were growing up in the internet, you brought this up before the show, the kids that were born into the age of the internet don't have the reference of knowing what it's like without the machine.
It's one thing.
Sometimes.
It's one thing to say when the boomers... when the greatest generation is talking about the boomers, and you're like, don't criticize the younger generation. Everybody does it. There's that quote from Socrates about how they got no respect. And then after several generations, you've come to the point where Gen Z is morbidly obese, lazy, demanding safe spaces full of cotton candy because people said naughty words on campus. And you compare that to the greatest generation who stormed the beaches of Normandy.
But again, how many members of this current generation that we're so quick to dismiss are the heroes who are responding at school shootings, or are in the military and doing extraordinary things, who are
We're missing our recruitment goals, and the Uvalde cops did nothing, and the cops and the security guard in Parkland ran away. So now what we're seeing is there was a story in Philadelphia where a man raped a woman on the train, and not a single person did anything to help. That's where we are with our current generation.
Does the name Kitty Genovese ring a bell?
Negative.
Has anyone heard of Kitty Genovese? Mm-hmm. So Kitty Genovese was a woman in Queens in 1964, and she lived in a big apartment building that had a central courtyard area. And she was attacked and raped repeatedly and killed. And she died from her injuries. And the investigation, this is 1964, which, as far as I'm concerned, is modernity. And the investigation determined that there were several dozen people who were aware of the attack, who were witnessing it take place, or different parts of it take place. Not one single person called the police. And the Kitty Genovese case endures as a model of urban sociology. It's been taught for 50 years in college courses. And what was the reason that nobody called the cops? And as opposed to your example on a subway where nobody lifted a finger, you're right there in the thick of it. You might be afraid that you're going to get slashed or whatever. Here was a situation where these several dozen people in this apartment complex looking down on their courtyard didn't even face the hurdle of personal exposure to danger, right? They just had to pick up a phone, and nobody did. And why didn't they?
I bet I know, because they all thought somebody else was going to do it.
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay,
well-
so, when you cite an example like that one on the subway as an example of today's depraved morality on the part of a given generation, then we can talk about Kitty Genovese from 1964, which was a generation by and large with much greater civic sense.
Yes, but I'm saying it just has gotten worse. Like, I'm not comparing those people to the people who stormed the beaches of Normandy. I absolutely agree that generations have increasingly gotten worse. Now, what we're dealing with there is two singular stories that it's the plural of anecdote is not data. We have these stories. They're interesting. But I think when you look at what's happening with our universities, you take a look at the fact that movies, they're firing, they fired Sarah Silverman, I think. She got fired from a movie because she did a blackface joke 15 years prior, mocking the idea. We're in a generation now where you have college students screaming at professors that this is not about education, it's about safe spaces.
Look, there's a lot of troubling phenomena out there with the current generation. All I'm saying is that if I were on that day where I have this supernumerary Reese's peanut butter cup that I just shouldn't, right, and I plop to the ground, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a person of the current generation who's going to get me to a hospital and who's going to take care of me.
But again, anecdotal.
But I think it's important.
But so is your subway story.
And I said that. I said quite literally, your story and mine are anecdotal.
But I'm willing to step back and say, let's multiply it by millions. So I don't make blanket statements about generations.
So let's do that. Let's talk about. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that if a woman is 9 months pregnant and at the point of birth, a doctor should be allowed to kill the baby?
So you're asking about my personal political opinions, which I'm not supposed to give because I'm a reporter.
So let's just put it this way. You don't have to answer that question.
Okay.
In Colorado, a woman can be at the point of birth, and a doctor can kill the kid. The Democrats tried passing a law allowing basically limitless abortion for the health of the mother. And there was interesting ways they described what that really meant. It could mean depression and things like that. We went into great detail. We're at a point now where our standard, and using abortion as one single example, you have states that have said no limit. You have states that have banned it outright. A complete hyperpolarization of morality in this country. You have you have states that are advocating for child sterilization with sex change surgery, despite the fact that the universities and medical practice in Europe have already abandoned it. They don't care about what makes sense. I think it is, not that I'm saying that we're going to lose, but there is a very clear moral decay in this country with the current generation that didn't exist with the previous generation.
And now, again, I'm not giving any of my own opinions because I'm not paid to do so, although I'm willing to explore those options with Timcast. But here you are talking about moral decay, and the person who you have identified just in the course of our conversation as the only person who can possibly start the great rescue effort of the United States that urgently needs to be undertaken is Donald Trump.
That's right.
Okay, who is married 3 times.
Yep.
Under indictment, presently facing on rape trial.
Fake rape trial.
But
that's quite literally the moral decay to which I'm referring. A 30-year-old case that clearly appears to be fabricated, a false accusation that he was working for Russia, Ukraine Gate, clearly something Joe Biden was doing, engaging in a quid pro quo, and our morally decayed country indicted Trump for figuring it out rather accidentally. Trump is not a saint. He's a lewd, lascivious old man. And it's scary that he is our best chance. But when you talk, You don't think
maybe politically, but I think it's in the music industry.
Oh, come on, he's in the bus saying you can grab the women, they let you do it, whatever. I'm not going to come out and be like, what the left is saying about him. He said they let you, fine, whatever. But it is fairly, locker room talk, whatever you want to call it. Trump is not a saint, but Trump is at the very least someone who's, I would say, our only chance at getting rid of the first layer of crust that has taken over our
and all the other
system.
Potential Republican contenders whose names we all know, you regard as hopelessly corrupt?
Well, like who?
DeSantis.
DeSantis, I think, is good. That's why I said a Trump DeSantis ticket is probably pretty good.
What do you think
I
about-
think it is a good job, but I think DeSantis is going to negotiate. And what that will do is just be another sludge in the machine of slowly moving forward, whereas Trump's going to go in like a bull in a china shop and just start saying, enough, I'm done with this.
We need the groundswell because the head does nothing without the body's attention. And so the people, the generation, I think this is why it's interesting you brought up, don't demonize generations of humans, because every generation faces its own, its own coming to God moment, its own struggle and overcoming of it. And this generation is facing it, and a lot of them are failing. They've been sucked into the machine and have become something they're not, or that they weren't, or that they don't want to be, or that they don't understand. But there's a lot of great ones. And we're speaking to all of them, especially the ones that are listening right now. Like, I don't know what 30, 40% of our audience is between the ages of 18 and 34. Like, we've got a lot of you listening right now, and it is you that is going to change the world and hold this thing together.
So what I'm saying is not that every single person that exists is bad. I'm saying that millennials have a very serious malignancy, and so does Gen Z, something that we've not seen in the past. In the 1990s, I grew up in Chicago as a Democrat, as Democrat could be, and I worked at a bunch of nonprofits. When I got older, I did register vote actions, and I thought I liked Obama until he started blowing up kids, and obviously the stuff he did to you was really bad. But that was what my family believed in. And when it came to abortion as a really good moral example, the argument that I would hear from my urban liberal Democrat friends was, no, none of us like it. We all think abortion is bad, but it's not an issue for government. It's an issue of medical practice. So we agree at a certain point, maybe it should not be allowed, but the government shouldn't intervene within a certain amount of time. Now the argument is that that female comedian going on Netflix saying, everybody get an abortion, you get an abortion. You have Lena Dunham going out and saying she wished she had one despite not being pregnant. She's like, I never got one, but I wish I did. That is absolute chaos and moral decay that didn't exist in the previous generation. And we're seeing that get crazier and crazier to the point where Washington and Colorado are creating sanctuaries for child sex changes. Like, it's just, come on. In Sweden, Finland, Denmark, they say, okay, we're going to stop doing these things that don't work. The Tavistock Center in the UK is being shut down. In the United States, the Democrats are codifying law to take 10-year-olds and give them hormones that sterilize them. And I'm just like, okay, the thirst for power and money knows no bounds. The doctor in Florida who made videos saying she was going to yeet teats today and talked about, she makes tons of money giving young girls double mastectomies because they're going through some kind of psychological trauma. This is moral decay that did not exist. Now, don't get me wrong, lobotomies happened. And then everybody was like, yo, these are bad things. We stop doing it. But today, there's a bifurcation. It feels like the traditional left and right paradigm is in one camp, and then this new morally psychotic algorithmic mess is the left.
Yeah, it's the first time that the international community has heavily influenced the United States like this.
I think the hardest thing is you don't want to demonize a whole generation. I think you're right. But on the other hand, we have to be honest about the challenges that they're facing. And the way that the generations before them have prepared them to take on the world is not serving them.
You're part of this generation. You should say we, not they.
I'm talking about millennials. I'm a millennial.
Yeah.
I think millennials are garbage. I think they're...
No, you guys are awesome, man.
Millennials are millennials are look, Gen X is fantastic. I think Gen X is great.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Gen X and boomers.
And I am willing to praise whole generations.
Oh, okay. So it works one way, but not the other.
Pretty awesome.
But here's how I view it. You have Gen Xers, which are net positive, but maybe it's 60-40. There's a decent amount of people in their 40s and 50s who are very weak and allow this kind of stuff to take over. You then get the millennial generation, which inverts, where very few millennials are of strong moral character and overwhelmingly are vapid, narcissistic, social media driven individuals. Gen Z actually might be slightly more based than millennials because we're starting to see a bunch of young people protest the algorithmic psychosis that millennials were entrenched in. So I think that may be a net positive, but Gen Z is still fairly even. Gen Z is better than millennials, I think, but millennials are, and I'm a millennial, I think millennials are the worst.
Well, the thing I like about Z and millennials is that they're involved. The problem with Gen X, and I'm not speaking for everybody, because obviously, James, you and I are X, I'm like tail end of it, you're earlier or in the middle of it somewhere, is that they checked out. A lot of Gen X is just checked out.
Well, the name of the movie was Slackers, right? I mean, that was one of the sort of iconic movies from the Gen X period. We were talking about this before we started the show. And yeah, I was born in 1968. So I turned 10 in the year 1978. You know, where an evening's entertainment was you watch TV, one of the 3 channels. Maybe you had a VHS machine, but you played board games. You know what I'm saying? And like there were times of the day that were set aside, generally the morning and 6 p.m. And in those times, if you wanted to be engaged in the business of acquiring information, those were the times when you did that. Otherwise, you were living your life. And I'm very grateful to have experienced a time before computers took over everything.
So what I see with the boomers, for instance, is that we had a lot of great content in the 90s. You know, having grown up in the 90s, I'm biased for sure. And
the Gin Blossoms.
Oh my God!
But
what a great band.
I think
Allison Road, man.
I think about
Take
where
me
we
there.
are culturally today, and especially with AI and algorithms and what that's leading to. It's static, it's chaos, and where we were in the 90s and before that, and it just feels like an unraveling, you know?
That is certainly, I feel like, an attack, a psychological attack by foreign interests, corporate interests, to try and disrupt the people of the United States. It's not a natural thing that just happened because these people are who they are.
I think it's just a result of the internet, right? I mean, exactly to your point, there was limited connection to the outside world. You got information at certain times. Otherwise, you were more engaged with your family life and your community. I don't think when we had the internet, which of course is a great blessing in a lot of ways, we knew what it was like. We didn't know we'd have to put it back in the box, right? We didn't know that at some point you would hand a 12-year-old a smartphone and say like, okay, be careful on this. You could get semi-addicted to it and be constantly seeking dopamine hits through people online. We didn't know what we were bringing up. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about the challenges that specifically face the youngest generations in this country, because they're unlike any generation before them.
We're hearing that crazy story about Roblox. Do you guys hear about this one?
No, tell me.
Predators are going on Roblox because they know there's no parents and it's all kids. And then they start indoctrinating these kids and saying creepy things to them and exploiting them. And that's...
But I think that also happened on do you remember RuneScape?
Yeah.
My brother used to play that, and like you would get people being like, oh, let me give you your phone number or whatever else. Like these again, very morally corrupt people will find a way to use technology that we think is innocent for negative and nefarious means.
And this is what we're seeing with Drag Queen Story Hour, is it's gotten to the point where the left establishment is protecting the exploitation of children to rather extreme degrees, like the sterilization of children. And you know what? I'm going to play this clip so I can explain to you moral bankruptcy in a way that I think you might say, oh man, let me see if I can pull this up from the Post Millennial.
I'm always up for some good moral bankruptcy.
Yeah.
In whatever form you want to feed it to me.
You know, you can go bankrupt and still be very wealthy, I found out. There is this phenomenon, I think, where people in this modern generation feel like they're failing if they're not on the internet, if they're not connected. It's a sort of failure. But the reality is the inverse. Taking 10 days away from the internet can make your life magnitudes better, greater, 100 times better.
I'm going to play for you this clip from a major television network. And warning to all those, you may have heard it before, it's disturbing.
But with her, I'm worried about like her mental well-being and her dilation. The minute she leaves my house, we have a dilation problem.
That is a concern. When you don't have that watchful eye, they tend to go back to old patterns.
I have woken Jazz out of a dead sleep and taken the dilator and put the lubrication on it and said, here, you take this and you put it in your vagina. If not, I will. But Jazz is bad, even when I'm home once a day. I would be so mad if she goes away to college and that thing seals up. I will wring her neck. Can you imagine?
This is a story about a biological male.
This entire discussion was beyond my technical ken.
So let me explain it. Let me say it for you as plainly and inoffensively as possible.
But yeah, all right.
I am not going to explain this to people in a way that will invite invective or aggression. I will just try and keep the language plain. This is the story about Jazz Jennings, a biological male who at the age of 3 was determined to be transgender by Jazz's family. Began social transition around 7, puberty blockers, hormone blockers. At the age of 17 as a minor, Jazz received a sex change operation. They refer to as bottom surgery. Typically, an adult male receives...
At what age?
17 as a minor. Typically, people receive what's called a penile inversion vaginoplasty if they're adults. But because Jazz underwent puberty blockers, Jazz did not develop any physical function in terms of sexual components. This resulted in severe complications and multiple surgeries where they had to take stomach lining to create the inside of what is a permanent wound in the pelvis of this young male. The purpose for which is so that a man who is attracted to Jazz can insert themselves for sexual gratification. After the surgery, because the wound tries to seal itself, you have to introduce what's called a dilator every day, which is a device that cranks the wound open with lubrication. This is the story of a mother on the Learning Channel, a major corporate cable channel, explaining how she wakes up her biologically male child in the middle of the night and says, stick this in your wound and crank it open or I will. And then goes on to say, if she leaves and that wound closes, I will wring her neck. Tell me this is not moral decay when on cable television, this, which I believe to be purely criminal child abuse, is celebrated. I see that and I just say, we have reached a severe state of moral decay.
It's a kind of, it sounds like a psychosis.
Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
A collective psychosis. And the idea that it would be presented on any sort of viable commercial television outlet of some kind is staggering to me.
And you know, Ron DeSantis hasn't filed any criminal charges against his family for what they've done. It's gotten to the point where, I'll phrase it this way. If it was 1990 and we heard a story about a parent who did this to their child, they'd probably be arrested, investigated. The child would be removed, given psychotherapy and some kind of help. This is to the point where not only is, look, there are people in this country who are mad at me right now for saying this. This woman says that she forces her child to do this. Her child clearly does not want to. That's why she has to wake up her child in the middle of the night and say, do it or I will, for a TV show. And instead of saying, maybe we should investigate because this sounds like abuse. This sounds like the child does not want to engage in this practice and the mother is making them do it and it could be potentially harmful. Why don't we get protective services or some kind of law enforcement to at least investigate? Not only are we not doing that, we're putting it on television, celebrating it, giving them commercials.
And selling ad time on it.
And their book. And Jazz has a book encouraging more children to engage in this.
Jazz is an adult now, which is why there's no protective custody thing going in. Now it's just, you would assume it's a consensual relationship between two consenting adults. Otherwise, Jazz would have filed a complaint.
Let me play this other clip because people are requesting I play this other clip. Here, we'll listen to this.
So, are you feeling like you wanted to start talking about? Are you okay?
I'm okay.
I'm like I'm going to cry. But
You know I can't get out of my head.
I know. No, listen.
It just doesn't stop.
It's okay. Give me a hug. It's okay. I know what you're going through. We've been there before.
No, it still doesn't stop now. And I'm already going back to negative.
But the more you're talking about yourself, it gets harder. You're digging in and it's making you put a magnifying glass on what's already difficult as it is. So this is hard for you. I know. And we don't want to push you
I know
anymore.
I'm the one doing it. Like,
I know. You're your own worst enemy.
I feel kind of all over the place and like my mind is very cluttered and not clear. And I really want to have that clarity. I really want to understand myself and be able to read my own soul and what I want. And it's just very challenging. And I think I'm kind of breaking down a little bit and spiraling into negativity. I just want to feel like myself. Like, that's it. I don't
Like
care.
the old Jazz?
All I want is to be happy and feel like me. And I don't feel like
What
me
is me?
ever.
So the interesting thing with this now is that Jazz, a biological male who was raised as a female and underwent surgery, is dating women. This to me is obvious moral corruption of our society in ways we've not seen in previous generations.
I'll tell you what it brings to mind for me. It brings to mind the statement from John Kenneth Galbraith. Raise your hand if you know who John Kenneth Galbraith was. He was an economist. He coined the term the affluent society. And he was also President Kennedy's ambassador to India. And he and Buckley used to have a kind of a relationship, sort of like Scalia and RBG, where you had these two people on different sides of the issues who would debate, and they were best friends. They would go skiing together, etc. But John Kenneth Galbraith said, I think around 1960, that America is the first country in the history of the world where more people are at risk of dying from having too much to eat than from having too little.
Oh, yeah.
And the choices and the decision making and the enterprise that you've just played are the choices and decisions and the enterprise of an elective society, where if you go around the world, or if you go into other neighborhoods in the United States where they don't have enough to eat, no one's doing this sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to note that this was something that boiled up over time, right? This was something that crept up to be at the point where we now talk about it as if it's a regular part of society. Jazz's show used to be on TLC. TLC also hosted 19 Kids and Counting, which were Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, who were these homeschooling Christians, and they were sort of another view at an extreme family, because that's how TLC made money for years and years and years. They took people who lived in sort of unorthodox ways or not in a normal way and put them both on TV. And one of the sons-in-law, Derek Dillard, on Twitter, I think this was in like 2016, maybe 2014, said, Jazz is being abused. This is not real. There's only two genders and this is all terrible. And TLC said he can't appear on the show anymore. He is not allowed to be on this thing where theoretically he makes money because they sided with the gender ideology. And this was, close to a decade ago at this point. We have seen this coming for some time, and instead of intervening and saying like, well, let's at least have both opposing opinions on air and let people sort it out for themselves. I know you always say this, but people saw, well, this one makes more money, so we'll side with it. I don't even know if it does make more money. But there is when you look back, it's sort of dark to think that along the way we could have had rational discussions and we could have said, I don't know, maybe this is too far. Maybe there are some boundaries we're crossing. And instead we're like, no, we need to let people live as they live, even when you sacrifice a child body, basically.
When I saw Rachel Dolezal, she was the lady out in the Seattle area, I think, who,
transracial,
who became convinced that she identifies as an African-American person, and, took every step possible to further that idea, including changes in the way she presented herself and so on. But she got as far with it as securing the position, I think, of executive director of the local NAACP out there. Okay, she got to be in charge of an organization that advanced the interests of people of color, even though she herself was white. And when I saw that take place, I thought to myself, well, what should prohibit me from saying that from the age of 5, I have strongly identified as a Beatle? And I'm going to demand that all of you, anyone who comes into my presence and all of you who don't, shall now treat me as a Beatle. That starts with the checks, but that's not the end of it, right? Like,
Beatle
I
the musician, not the bug.
The sixth Beatle.
Sixth?
I suppose. Well, there's the drummer, and then I guess you could say Epstein.
Original Paul. The first Paul was the.
Are you the original Paul?
I am the 6 millionth fifth Beatle is what I am. But again, this isn't happening. What you just played, the Jazz Jennings saga, isn't happening in places where people are scrounging just to have enough to eat.
Right.
These are the decisions, the elective decisions of an affluent society. And what's
moral decay.
And it's just extraordinary to
me.
me.
Are you familiar with the rat hope experiment?
No.
Scientists put a bunch of rats in a limited space, unlimited resources, food and water, and then observed what they would do. And they broke down to the point where, like, they were huddling around each other, no longer engaging in normal rat behavior. One group started grooming themselves and did nothing else. Their behavior started to break down. They became aggressive. With a limited amount of space, they would all congregate in one small area.
Right.
The social breakdown resulted in like stopping eating and then dying. When they would take one of the rats from this place and put it back into a normal rat society, it would retain the social behaviors and spread them and then bring social decay. So that's very horrifying.
A behavioral sink, the rat utopia. I think you may have said rat hope experiment, which is a different one.
The hope was a different one. That was the rat
they put
utopia.
them in water and make them swim, but it's the rat utopia.
Yeah, the rat hope one's scary too.
Yeah, when you give people unlimited food, how do you convince them not to eat too much? Become a Christian, become a Jew? Like, gluttony is a sin for a reason?
Well, the difference is cities are like the rat utopias, but you can still get out to the country and get away from these congested areas. So the difference is in the rat utopia, they stayed in one place. In the human utopia, people who are seeing the decay are fleeing, and the people who are absorbing the decay are staying.
And they're making TV shows about the people that are staying there.
That's right.
And then they're broadcasting it to the entire world and saying, look how profitable it is if you're like that.
And but
make a show out of you.
Jazz can't have children. So, the people of this moral ideology eventually, from aborting their children and sterilizing their children, are less likely to reproduce and share those ideologies. They try to go to schools, but conservatives have started pulling their kids out and engaging in homeschooling. So I think, rather optimistically, for bad reasons, the future is more likely to course correct, and this will naturally resolve itself.
Yeah.
Well, these kind of movements, which are Stalinist at their core, ultimately become self-devouring. My feeling about this is that in 1954, we had Brown v. Board of Education, right? The landmark Supreme Court ruling that overturned Plessy v. Ferguson from 1896, which had said separate but equal is constitutional, right? And after Brown v. Board of Ed, it was no longer lawful or constitutional for a state system to discriminate against somebody based on their color. And then there were subsequent Supreme Court rulings which, I think Brown v. Board of Ed mandated desegregation, quote, with all deliberate speed. But there was I think it's Alexander v. Holmes, forgive me for not remembering it off the top of my head, but there was a 1969 Supreme Court ruling which took it further and said, not with all deliberate speed, now, okay? So African Americans were and remain a minority group, okay? I think they comprise 13% of the American population. Let's assume it was roughly the same in 1954. This was a minority group that was terribly aggrieved and sought redress through the courts and succeeded. And ever since then, what you've had is every minority group, some of them with far less compelling claims to being aggrieved, they're all seeking their Brown v. Board of Ed moment.
Well, hold on. The left today, Black Lives Matter, for instance, they want to reverse Brown v. Board of Ed. Derek Bell, for instance, spoke out against it, saying it was wrong, and he agreed with Plessy v. Ferguson. So if they're allowed to continue down that path, we'll get segregation. And in fact, they've reintroduced segregation in many universities.
Well, this would be the difference between the civil rights movement and BLM. But in short, what you're seeing with this fight over bathrooms and the whole transgender question is a minority group that has its own sense of aggrievement and which is seeking to use the courts and other traditional means to redress this to their satisfaction. Now, when everyone saw the TV broadcasts of the film footage of Sheriff Bull Connor, sicking dogs and fire hoses and billy clubs on innocent African American demonstrators, the horror was so vivid and readily discernible that no one would quarrel with a ruling like Brown v. Board of Ed. The policy was so self-evidently discriminatory, and there was so much interaction between the majority and the minority group. Here, I remember seeing Cory Booker on the very first debate that was held for the 2020 cycle. It was in late June of 2019. And you had so many Democratic candidates in June of 2019. They had to have two programs back to back with what they call the kids' table. And Cory Booker, he's been around for a while. People in Washington certainly know who he is, but perhaps this was his chance really to introduce himself to the American electorate writ large, and maybe he wouldn't get another better chance, and as it happened, he didn't. But I remember him saying in that debate, we must spend more time talking about trans Americans, and in specific, African American trans Americans, to tepid applause. We're talking about a minority here that is a fraction of a fraction
a few hundred
of a
people
fraction,
in the country.
Okay? And yet look at the extraordinary attention that's paid to this. Look at the resources that are consumed with it. Look how much time we're spending discussing it, okay? And that is because...
But we're not talking about that small a minority. We're talking about, I think, 47,000 young people in the past 4 years have been put on sterilizing chemicals. I think that's fairly substantive that establishment medical practices are engaging in this behavior to this degree. And we're in the thousands of young girls who have had their breasts removed. And we're talking about 15-year-old girls.
Right. No, but what I'm talking about is the success of a very, very small minority in bringing its grievance to the big show.
But this is my point. It's not a small minority. It is powerful establishment political forces bringing this issue to the
being
forefront.
co-opted or aligning themselves with this tiny, tiny minority of people.
But it's a child who doesn't know what any of this is being brought to a doctor to have her breasts removed is not a member of a community seeking civil rights justice. It is an adult who is not. Jazz Jennings' mother is not a trans person. Jazz Jennings' mother introduced her 3-year-old child to this. Right. So it's not the minority. But we do have to go to Super Chats.
Wait, you were about to say because...
8 minutes.
No.
Oh, you answered it. Okay.
So if you haven't already, would you kindly smash that like button? Head over to timcast.com, become a member. So you can watch the uncensored members-only show coming up at about 10 p.m. But let's read your Super Chats. I'm Not Your Buddy Guy says, this is Canada. A conservative MP had his family threatened in China, and the Liberals silenced him, saying it would be debunked despite CSIS confirmation. I mean, the CCP had threatened his family in China. Interesting. Grofty says, Tom McDonald should be protected at all costs for this country. Change my rooster mind. Buck. Tom McDonald is fantastic. He has a new song, Dirty Money. You guys should definitely check it out. Support his work. Raymond G. Stanley Jr. says, Tim, at first I was angry about the weak-willed wants to understand white rage run in our military into degradation, then recalled living on a ship for a year with sailors, and well, sounds about right. Unfortunate. Robert Knight says the Fed rate hike today will destabilize the banking industry more. Powell didn't rule out another rate hike in June. This is unfurling and dangerously. Also expect energy prices to spike in summer. Definitely with air conditioning. Joel Stein says, yesterday's convo about sponsoring a sports team. You should put a picture of your big Roberto Jr. on the hood of a NASCAR Cup Series car. The first car comes to mind. You are a wrecking ball. I don't know if I can afford that.
Have you heard about Roberto Jr.?
No.
We have a chicken colony. I'm probably not the one who can
There's
describe
babies.
Best.
We have babies.
Yeah, they're new
babies.
babies. And this is part of
Chicken City.
Tim's personal interest and also sort of the cultural, movement to grow your own
So
food.
Roberto Jr. is that the lead chicken? Or
the sheriff.
Roberto,
One and only.
Roberto was, and then he had a son.
He was
Roberto
the prince,
Jr.
and now he is the king.
But Roberto had to retire because he was banging his daughters, and you can only allow that for so long.
Dirty.
Yeah, no.
Chickens, it's called line breeding, actually. So you can do like a generation, but you don't want to keep doing it. And so then we introduced Roberto Jr., but now we're getting to the point where Roberto Jr. may have to get his own private mansion with some girls because, now he's
become
is also
part of the very problem he was intended to solve.
I think Roberto Jr. has one child, but big news: the Silkies had 4 babies, and the Cochin had 2 babies. So, wow, look at that. The chickens are making more of themselves.
Mazel tov.
For you, Tim, as emperor, who will you designate as the next viceroy when Junior steps down or is removed from power?
Man, that's tough. Maybe we'll give Lil Luke his reign.
I like it.
Ian, to see you shamelessly lobbying for the job this way it's very unappealing.
I mean, I'm already in, but I don't want to talk about it online.
Michael Knowles will be the sheriff of Chicken City.
That makes sense. You remind me of Michael Knowles. Has anyone ever told you that before?
No, but I know who he is. He's a good-looking guy, so I'll take it.
Absolutely.
All right.
Let's grab
also
some more
a huge
Super
Beatles
Chats.
fan.
Vocal cadence.
I don't know if that's true. I'm making it up.
Gabby Hayes says, Ian, I want you to know you have a true supporter in me. Everyone else may not always know where you come from, but I know it's from a place of love and passion. Glad you're back. Long live Timcast.
Gosh, thanks, Gabby.
Daystar says, who do you think supplied those drones? Well, if it was Russia, then Russia. If it was Ukraine, then Iran.
Iran's been supplying drones to the Russians.
To the Russians?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But they're like small ones, aren't they?
I can't say I know the exact models, but that's where they've been getting their drones from.
Casey Willis says, first Super Chat ever, and I've been listening since day one. Had my first cup of your Appalachian Nights blend this morning, and I do have to say, as a usual drinker of Folgers, your coffee is chef's kiss. Oh yeah, so the 2 signature blends we have now, we have a light and a dark, and we have like a very light and a very dark. Next we're making is, so this will be about 6 weeks, is a medium and a light and a dark decaf. So the medium roast is Stand Your Grounds. And then we have Unwoke and Sleepy Joe. the decaf ones. Those are great.
Will you bring Rise with Roberto Jr. tomorrow? I'd like to try a little before the show.
We need to order a bunch more, but Appalachian Nights is a very, very dark roast. It's not as dark as an espresso blend, but it is dark.
That's less caffeine.
Yep.
Maybe bring that one. Do you have that one too?
We don't have that one.
Okay.
We did before, but we drank it all. Then the new orders came in, and I ordered just a single sample for display.
And Rise with Roberto Jr., if you like a nutty blend, I mean...
Very bright.
Yeah, it's really good. Fresh smell.
Does Newsmax have its own coffee?
They don't have their own coffee, but they're generous with coffees. Like they have a machine where, you just push this button, the thing comes, and then they have 15 different blends that you can choose from, which all look like the same communist blend. But and you stick that, it's like a pouch, right? It's a pouch, and you stick it in there, and it's got a little tip at the top of the pouch, and you close the thing, and coffee comes out, and I drink it.
Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
It's free.
Are you going to do K-Cups for
Yes,
Timcast?
those are currently in production. K-Cups.
Cool.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to order 1,000 for us here, and they're going to be just unlabeled, just so that we can have them, so we can drink them, because I want to have my coffee in the morning. But K-Cups are in production.
Cool.
And I was adamant that we make biodegradable.
Yes, thank you, sir.
However, that is going to have to probably be the next batch after the first one, because they're not quite at production capability yet.
Cool.
But I'm really excited for that. I wouldn't want to do K-Cups if the future of it was just making more plastic garbage.
Yeah.
But and also I don't like eating the plastic, so But the biodegradable ones are made of corn protein or something, so they break down. All right, Glenn 1833 says a Focus microwave or EMP burst defense gun.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought.
Yeah, microwaves will scramble the signal, but people, and if you can heat it up, you can knock it out of the sky, short it out. So you need a lot of power. Scrambling the signal, I mean to say, isn't enough, because these things are pre-programmed. It doesn't need remote control. It knows where it's going. Goldilocks Production says Israel's Iron Dome can take out hundreds of rockets at one time. If it can take out multiple near supersonic rockets at one time with an almost 97% accuracy rate, it can handle hundreds of drones. I disagree. We're talking about small drones the size of your fist carrying an explosive payload, and we're talking about thousands and even hundreds. They're going to be flying low and over buildings. They're not going to be able to be shot out of the sky.
They might be flying straight down too.
But they're not going to come from way up high. They're going to be on the ground. They're going to jump over walls and go to their targets.
What do you think?
I'd be.
You don't want to give your expertise?
Yeah, I think I'd have more expertise on the incestuous chickens and
your chicken man
and some of the other exotic subjects we've covered.
Fair enough.
Chickens are good people. They just they do chicken stuff. Purple says, God bless everyone here. We're all here because we want to be better. Stay confident and believe in yourself. Hard times won't last forever. Evil is real, but we don't have to let it into our body and mind. Always remember, Jesus loves you. Look, I think the night is always darkest before the dawn. The bad things that are happening are not the apocalypse. Humans have faced great struggles, and the struggles make us stronger. So if weak men make hard times, we are in those hard times, but never forget those hard times will make strong men. So after we pull through this, everything's going to get a whole lot better. That's the fourth turning. We're in the fourth turning now. The next season will be spring, and then we're going to see 60 years of prosperity and then 20 years of calamity. But
this is what I was asking you earlier. I was saying, do you regard that the American enterprise is foreordained to success that will always elude the Chinese enterprise?
Well,
and you sound more optimistic.
But China is going to go through a similar thing, right? Their moral bankruptcy will lead to it's as the saying goes: strong men make good times make weak men make hard times make strong men. Everyone's going to go through that. So I think the planet will just be changing. I think the U.S. is set for a hard fall. We'll probably lose superpower status. I can't see how we maintain it with the petrodollar already in
How
decay.
will we know when we have lost superpower status? What will be the
when your laptop
unmistakable clue?
When all the
you'll want to buy a laptop and it'll cost you $7,000.
Or I think when American military bases start getting taken over in their native countries,
That's
and then
especially bad. But I think the first thing we'll start seeing is imports will become exorbitantly expensive because the petrodollar will just be weak and the U.S. won't be exporting anything. And then it's going to become harder to come by certain goods. We'll start seeing serious inflation. China will move on Taiwan and will shrug. Things like that will start happening. But grains of sand making a heat. You won't recognize the history until the history's passed. Mm-hmm. We could be in World War III right now, and we won't know until 50 years afterwards when the historians say, well, we believe it started on this date.
Well, it's like a recession, yes.
Right. Yeah, you got to be in it before you know you're in it. Let's grab some more super chats. Dimsum Nimsum says the drone attack seems as incompetent as the Ukrainian attack with the fighter missile in 2014. Maybe both were CIA.
Yeah, it just went right down at the gentle angle, right into above the flag, and then just blew up right there. It's a
I
nice
think it was
photo
taken
op.
out, though.
Yeah, that's what the Kremlin said. They took it out.
Did
Yeah,
they take it out
they
right
destroyed
in
it.
where they wanted to take it out? So they made it look like it was attacking, but it was
They
just
didn't
being
give us
brought
that
down.
many details, I have to say.
It's just such a cheap attempt. It looks so cheap.
Staged.
Yeah.
OMG Puppy says Russia has a system called the Dead Hand that will automatically launch a second strike even if we vaporize Moscow. And I believe that exists. What I'm saying is that nuclear war isn't the apex. So when people talk about nuclear war and mutually assured destruction, what people need to understand about that is it's referring to the very end of the nuclear war, not the beginning and middle of it. Most people, when I talk to them about mutually assured destruction, so this is how it comes up. I say, I think Putin will use nukes. No, he won't because of mutually assured destruction. I'm like, dude, the start of the war is not Putin being like, blow up New York, and then we fire back. It's him being like, tactical nuclear artillery, wipe out Kiev, and then us being like, I don't want to sacrifice my capital for Ukraine, so what do? Let's send in troops, let's declare war, but it's not going to immediately be ICBMs flying all over the place.
And to your point, when the Soviets installed nuclear missiles on Cuba, precipitating the Cuban Missile Crisis, people forget this. They also sent 40,000 Russian personnel, Soviet personnel, to Cuba to build. They had to build roads. It was crazy. But the point being that, as you say, it's not just there's a missile flying through the air and suddenly we're in nuclear war. The machinations that are necessary just to launch one nuclear missile are fairly elaborate and detectable. So that we would have more warning than just the radar system telling it
Doesn't suddenly happen.
that the projectile is in the air.
Kalashnikov says, Tim, you should make Matt Walsh watch Attack on Titan or Psychopaths, then see if he holds the same ignorant opinions that all anime is demonic. Does he really believe that? I mean,
I don't know. My guess is that he likes to troll mixed in with his
right,
speeches
like he's being
with
somewhat
his wisdom.
facetious when he says it's all demonic. He's just trying to get a rise, but he thinks a lot of it is. I do think there's a lot of really bad anime, but that's also like saying we got bad cartoons in the United States too.
Also, if he does and you don't agree, like, that's fine, isn't it?
Well, but he's wrong.
Okay, sure,
and he's
but
not he's not allowed to have bad opinions.
That's true.
Like most of his
He
opinions are
should
actually pretty
know
good.
better.
Exactly.
I went through phases where I
Matt
thought
Walsh is based. Therefore, I am disappointed to hear that he doesn't like anime.
I went
And
through
he
a
can't
phase.
disagree with anyone. He has to have the correct opinion
It's true.
always.
I thought that entertainment and alcohol were like the devil or demon, and but then I realized I was extremely egotistical in that time, and that like a balance of these things is part of the nature.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have an
Kiabo-
opinion? Oh, sorry.
I'm going to read some more. Gabo Bandit says, sitting in the ER with an eye patch on and I still wouldn't miss the show, even if I'm 20 minutes behind. Keep up the good work,
back,
folks. Wow.
dude.
Hope you're okay.
Heal up.
Yeah.
What if he's just hanging out there, though? He's fine. He just went to the ER and hung out
And
with
wearing an eye patch because it looks cool.
He's just living his life.
Or maybe just after he hit send on that message, he was subjected to gross medical malpractice, and he's not even with us anymore. I hate to bring up those kinds of...
And we're the dark ones? Come on, sir.
It's the Grimcast.
David Toronto says, sorry, I'm against all drag now. Look what people accepting has led to. It's give an inch, take a mile. I'm done giving.
Nope.
Well, that's where we're at. Hyperpolarization.
I'm going to wear a dress on the show just to do it to you.
I suppose the challenge is, when Jordan Peterson talks about social enforcement, there was shared morality on what the parameters were, what we should and should not do. And we got to the point where liberals won, live and let live, anyone can do whatever they want. But if anyone can do whatever they want, you now have to explain to a child why it is that someone is doing something in public, which leads to the expansion of whatever these things are, and that's where we're at. Joe Spinella said the Navy just asked Bud Light to hold their beer. Quite literally, they were like, hey, you want some Bud Light?
They're going to be the new Bud Light partner, the Navy. It's not going to get better.
Rebecca Carne, is that what it says? Carn? I did 5 years as a corpsman in the Navy. This drag, trans, and other stuff makes me glad I'm not in anymore. Also, active duty members can protest, but not in uniform or state their active duty. Interesting.
I just don't understand why Bud Light didn't make Dylan Mulvaney the face of their seltzer, which they are constantly trying to say, like,
no one would
we
have
a
cared.
Seltzer. No one would have cared. This whole thing would have been avoided, and then suddenly Bud Light Seltzer would have had sort of this brand era that they're apparently trying to use to connect with the youth.
Speaking of, did the marketing VP get her job back? I haven't been following
She's
up.
still on leave, but I don't know if that means she's coming back, which I bet she is one day.
Kyle Miller says, Tim, as someone who works in disaster recovery, there is no recovery plan for if a civil event was to happen, we would be stagnant for decades. A civil event, like war in the United States or something?
Or like a breakdown.
Well, we have Presidential Directive 51, which the president can just create a new government and erase the old one by signing a paper.
Yeah, good luck with that, president.
It will happen.
They'll maybe on the federal level, but states are like in control.
Yeah, no, the blue states would say okay outright.
Maybe.
And then it'd be really interesting after that. Probably only Florida and South Dakota would say no.
I could see it as like a defensive maneuver, but, you know.
I mean, people need to read
rights.
more about the Civil War because there were slave states that were like, we disagree with what's going on, but we really don't want to go to war.
Dude, I was just at Harper's Ferry yesterday, or 2 days ago. My God, it was 180 years ago, and they were just burning the city to the ground.
That's a
very
crazy story.
recent.
Mm-hmm.
The story of Harper's Ferry. The biggest mistake John Brown made was he let the train leave.
John Brown said slavery is an act of war. Slavery is an act of war. That's a quote from John Brown.
Yeah, John Brown was notorious for just him and his kids going and killing people. Crazy guy.
And they claim he's a hero.
I mean,
At least the sign did in Harper's Ferry.
Is he was a
and because
hero?
of him, we have done the righteous thing, and now we have no slavery in the country.
I mean, he failed. Like he everything he did
But he
was
tried
a failure.
really hard. So we should give him some
He did kill
partial
people,
credit.
but he took the armory and then failed. And the slaves that were here were like, "We don't want to be involved in what you're doing, man." And he was like, "Uh-oh." And then they came and they hung him, hanged him. Hanged him. Uh-oh. Legomathagayan says, Ian, how can you be so full of such illiterate fury and passion about things you barely comprehend? On even a semantic level, I beg you with tears in my eyes to never describe yourself as becoming Jewish ever again.
But it's true.
Shalom Aki.
Oh, shalom to you, man. No,
Are
I'm
you
not
converting?
actually. No. I'm just getting in touch with God without the middleman.
Okay.
Well, all right. Where are we at? Dorian Marius Gray says, if Luke was there, he would remind Tim that no politician is coming to save you. Why you are putting so much faith in Trump as the savior of the world? I'm not. I'm saying the only thing that has a potential to actually purge the corruption in this government is probably Trump. But I didn't say that was going to save anybody. I said it is going to get worse. We are going to fall off as a global superpower, whether Trump does anything or not. Trump will just kind of bring back some seed of stabilization after he's gone. We'll see, though, man. I don't know. I'm not psychic. I'm not like that Nostradamus guy who just happened to know everything, right?
No, you have internet video, so you're able to convince people. You don't just have to just make predictions in your basement.
Matt Walsh always has to have the right opinion, and you have to know everything ahead of time. I thought this was the agreement you guys made with the internet.
In 2007, I was obsessed with ending the liberal economic order. Not ending it, but I was like, oh, this whole American military base all over Earth is horrible. Let's stop it. And everyone agreed, like, that knew about it. But now we're actually watching it happen, and it's like, what's the alternative?
We got an important one here. Michelle Therese says, Tim and crew, great show and great guest. James, check out the Genovese documentary made by Kitty's brother, where he debunks the story that no one came to Kitty's aid. People did call the police and stayed with her while waiting for the ambulance.
That's not how it was taught, but I will check it out. I wonder what platform I can see that documentary.
I don't trust the media, so I mean, I hear that and I'm like, all right, I'll consider it.
It's like
Present company excluded, of course.
To quote Anthony Blinken
we're
today,
me too.
take it with a large shaker of salt.
A large shaker.
That was what he said in
Yeah,
response
yeah.
to the Ukraine theoretical assassination attempt.
Just to make a point too, 911 wasn't a thing in New York up until 4 years after that. They actually used that case to make a point for having 911 systems in the city. So just to know.
Scary Terry says the Discord should vote on the Roberto Jr. successor. Roberto Jr. we're going to build him like something special.
Like
Do
the
we have
bionic
to-
chicken.
Yeah.
Well, I actually wanted to 3D print chicken armor. And one thing I wanted to consider was, can we put together some kind of carbon fiber wing extensions to allow the chickens to fly better? I think it can be done.
Like
I think
an aerogel, graphene aerogel, something threaded.
Is it strong enough?
It's super lightweight.
If you do an aerogel with carbon fiber strands going through it to give it structural support, stability, then it probably would work. Aerogel would be brittle, isn't it?
Yeah, but when it's mixed with other things, it can become very strong. Like there's this stuff called airloy. It's an aerogel compound that you can hit with a hammer and machine it and stuff.
I want to do like a helmet and body armor for the chickens. And one thing I really want to make for Bocus is, imagine we gave him a wing suit, like a backpack.
Focus is our cat.
So when he jumps, the wings deploy and he glides, and when he lands, they retract. So long as his feet are out, the wings come out.
You can buy all of this stuff at acme.com, right? It's just that they have bad testimonials from one coyote who had apparently bad experiences with their products.
I just think the world would be greatly improved if we made wingsuits for cats.
I think it could be interesting.
Yeah,
Birds would
what could
probably
go
not
wrong?
like it.
Yeah.
I
watched
want
one
to
just
know,
yank a fish out of the
read the
water.
successor question. Do the candidates have to make promotional videos that are then shared on Discord? That way you really get to know them. They can say what their policies are, what they would be in favor of.
It might be one of the Silkies, because then we'll have soft, fluffy chickens.
I like that.
But maybe a little Luke, because he's got a cool haircut.
In my mind, because the Silkies live in a coop inside the coop, or at least they did for so long,
Yeah,
they
still
are
do.
more scared. So it's hard for me to imagine one of them taking over this
have
job
domed
of
heads
leading the
is
chicken
the problem.
army. Oh, yeah, and it makes them more vulnerable to attack, right?
So
Again, hard to imagine them being installed
the
as the
rooster's
rightful
fine.
leader.
The rooster's fine.
Oh, okay.
You can't have two roosters, one with a domed head, and one with not. So little Luke has a domed head. So if he gets pecked in the head, he'll get a concussion and die. But if he's the only rooster, he's got nothing to worry about. So, but little Luke's feet are also like messed up. So we're not even sure he'll be able to properly,
I like
handle the ladies.
He's like the crippled son of some sort of monarch who's like got this chance
like
at the
Joffrey?
throne. Sure, yeah, like
Game
he's
of Thrones?
got a chance. I've never seen Game of Thrones.
Oh, you should
we-
watch
we-
it. It's
we
amazing.
wanted
The
to
first
do,
season's incredible, dude.
we wanted to do Sarah's son, Isaac, but he's too big because he's a Brahma. And so he's going to hurt the ladies. He's massive. So
Do you guys think that people consider installing politicians this in such detail as we do with the chickens?
His domed head makes him vulnerable.
He's just too big. It's just not okay.
I don't know about Biden, his domed head. All right, everybody, if you haven't already, would you kindly smash the like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends, and become a member by going to timcast.com and clicking Join Us, where you can hang out in the Discord server with like-minded individuals, submit questions, and even call in to our members-only after show, which will be live in about 10 minutes on the front page of timcast.com. This one is, once again, probably not so family-friendly, so you don't want to miss it. Again, timcast.com. You can follow the show at Timcast IRL. You can follow me personally at Timcast. And guess what? Timcast News on Twitter has now a gold verification badge, which is very good news. And then the people who work at Timcast get a little Timcast thing next to their name because Twitter is doing good stuff. So, yeah, do that. And James, you want to shout anything out?
It was great to be with you all. Once again, I'm James Rosen. I cover the White House for Newsmax. You could see my work on Newsmax. You can follow me on Twitter at JamesRosenTV, and I am the author of a new book, Scalia, Rise to Greatness, 1936 to 1986, first volume of a 2-volume biography of someone who is really one of the most important Americans of the last 100 years, Antonin Scalia.
And it's out now.
It is.
Cool. I'm Hannah.
I got a question for you right when we start the members only show that everybody wants to hear, but we'll
save it. Okay.
About Scalia.
I'm Hannah Claire Brimlow. I'm a writer for Timcast.com. I am very newly verified on Twitter, so if you want to follow me there, I'm at HC Brimlow. I'm HannahClaire.b on Instagram. And more importantly, you should follow at Timcast News on Twitter and Instagram. You can read stuff from me, from Chris Burtman, from Adrian Norman, all of our journalists there. It's really, to me, the best part of the website. And yeah, thanks so much for tuning in tonight.
Thank you, Hannah Claire. I'm Ian Crossland. You guys can follow me at iancrossland.net. Subscribe to me on YouTube at Ian Crossland. Twitter, follow me there at Ian Crossland James. What a night. Raucous, quite an event. And tell me again, you've told me before the record, your favorite Beatles album.
Yeah. This is so dirty on your part. You know that I reject any true Beatles freak rejects the whole who's your favorite Beatle song, favorite Beatle album. Now I do. You're right. Just come on, just come out. I do have a favorite solo Beatle. That's permissible. Okay, but not a favorite
Who's
Beatle.
your favorite
Well,
solo?
let's Serge.
It was a utilitarian response.
Yeah.
The White Album. It's the longest album. I'm not going to stick you to it.
If forced to choose, one chooses the White Album.
It's a lot of
It's
good.
the only double album.
Good meat.
People should come to
Serge is
Members
also
Only
here
tonight.
pressing buttons.
Mine's Revolver.
Yeah,
Rubber
I'm just
Soul.
watching. What's up, guys? It's Serge.com. Ready for the after show. Let's go.
All right, everybody. We'll see you all over at timcast.com in about 10 minutes. Thanks for hanging out.